The town clerk has advised me that we have a quorum, and I call to order session number 4 of the 2022 annual town meeting. Couple of announcements before we get underway.
Turn the microphone. Oh, that's going to go inside now.
The order of the articles this evening is as follows. We will start with Articles 23 and 24. They will be debated together. Upon completion of 23 and 24, we will proceed to Articles 9 through 11. Article 14, we did 12 and 13 last night. Article 14, and then there's no motion under 15, so 16 through 18. Apparently my mic is not coming through clearly. I apologize for that. We're working on it. You don't need to hear from me as much as you do from the speakers, so let me proceed to that list shortly. Article 23, the main motion under Article 23 is found on the gray supplement number 1, pages 1 to 3, moved by Mr. Toffel, seconded by Ms. Benka, to adopt a resolution, in the words of the resolution going over to page 3 of supplement number 1. Article 24, the main motion, is on page 24-4 to 5, moved by Ms. Daly, seconded by Mr. Richmond, to add a bylaw provision relating to artificial turf surfaces. There is one amendment. It's found on the yellow supplement on supplement number 3, page 1, moved by Ms. Hatchett and seconded by Ms. Khan, to amend paragraph A of the main motion. And finally, there is a motion to refer the subject matter of Article 24, which is found on the supplement supplement number 4, page 1, moved by Carla Benka, seconded by Mr. Doughty. The order of the voting will cover when we get to the votes under Article 24. Now, we're having a single debate, and I have 40 people signed up to speak to Article 23, 24. And the positions they're taking are, there's every conceivable combination of positions. So it was impossible for me to organize the usual pro and con list. And we're just going to have to, we'll have presentations by the sponsors of the main petitioners of Articles 23 and 24. Then we'll hear from the advisory committee. And then we'll hear from individuals or groups in no particular order, except the order in which they signed up ordinarily, and giving some preference to town meeting members along the way. So I call on Mr. Toffel, who will address Article 23. Each of the presenters has 5 to 8 minutes to present. Mr. Toffel.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Could I ask the IT folks to please pull up my slides?
Say it again.
The slides, please. Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mike Toffel, Precinct 8. I'm the petitioner of Article 23, which I wrote in response to Article 24, which seeks to impose a moratorium and restrictions on synthetic turf. Article 23 calls on the Select Board to create a task force of experts to produce a report and decision guidelines to propose circumstances when synthetic turf or natural grass is the more suitable field surface. The task force should consider many factors and should draw on a wide range of expertise to enable policymakers to distinguish science and facts from advocacy. My concern is that some of those advocating a moratorium are doing so while mixing facts and advocacy and stoking fear instead of reason. Next slide, please. The task force I'm proposing is meant to draw on expertise, including toxicology, public health, environment and climate, risk assessment, children's socio-emotional health, pediatric physical development, athletics, parks and rec, our school department, and capital planning. Next slide, please. Here's the work plan. The Select Board would appoint members in June, and it would the task force would have July, August, September, and October to do its work and issue its report and decision guidelines by November 4th after holding a public hearing. This is not an academic study that takes years. It's an expert review of what's already known to help us understand what's known, again, separating facts from advocacy. This process should take weeks, not years. The November 4th deadline is specifically chosen to be in time to inform town meeting if a petitioner wants to bring this issue up again in the fall. It's also in time for the Driscoll building to change course against its December 1st deadline, if that's what the policymakers decide. Next slide, please. This is a complicated decision with many trade-offs. Here are some of the questions we should get answered by the experts. When is field usage so intensive that grass will surely be eroded, such that the honest choice is between compacted dirt and synthetic turf? How does the risk of injuries compare between synthetic turf and Brookline's grass fields, ignoring unrealistic comparisons to lush professional fields that are seldom used? What's the difference in field availability? We know grass fields are closed for many weeks each year due to rain and growing seasons. Are synthetic turfs in Brookline unavailable, or should they be, due to heat island effect? And if so, for how many hours or days? How many of our youth are excluded from organized sports because they book synthetic fields at private schools or other towns, triggering access and equity concerns? What are the actual risks associated with synthetic fields and natural grass, as articulated by toxicologists and PFAS experts, not lay folks who claim to be experts? What are all the environmental and climate considerations, including comparative water use, chemical exposure, end-of-life issues, and greenhouse gas emissions, including car rides to out-of-town fields when needed due to our field space shortage? Next slide, please. A key assumption motivating Article 24 is that Brookline synthetic turf poses health and environmental risks from PFAS. But is that true? Next slide, please. PFAS is indeed a growing concern in drinking water, and that's what the Massachusetts PFAS Interagency Task Force focused on. It identified sources of PFAS contamination and exposure pathways that pose the greatest risk to public health and the environment. Its 88-page final report issued this year cites many sources of PFAS: food packaging, household materials, personal care products, non-stick cookware, water-resistant clothing, and firefighting foam was mentioned 30 times. Did it forget to mention synthetic turf? Or is synthetic turf not an important source of PFAS contamination? Let's get informed and ask the experts. Next slide, please. Let's look at this lab test report that analyzes synthetic turf that is slated to be installed at Driscoll, the same product that was used at Ridley. The test found no evidence of any presence of the 33 PFAS tested substances. Should that alleviate our concern about PFAS at Driscoll and Ridley? Let's let the task force experts inform us in their written report under Article 23. Next slide, please. Turning to Article 24, I wonder whether the test protocols proposed in Article 24 are appropriate to assess PFAS exposure. I've looked into this over the past months and I'm skeptical. It doesn't seem ready for prime time, and here's why. Article 24 lists particular EPA test methods, but those are drinking water test methods, and the petitioners refer to no authority that says they're appropriate to test solid materials like synthetic turf. But even if we agreed on the method, Article 24 doesn't specify any test thresholds. Is less than 1 part per million test result I just showed you sufficient? Or should it be 1 part per billion? While thresholds are being set for drinking water at the parts per trillion, we haven't seen any thresholds set for things like synthetic turf. Let's let the experts inform us of this and bake that into Article 24 of the future. I've asked the petitioners of Article 24 to share whether their testing approach embedded in the bylaw proposal is based on any recognized national or state standards, and haven't heard back. Let's let the expert task force weigh in. Next slide, please. We need to know a lot more about this complicated topic. As was seen today in the flurry of emails by the TMMA list, it is clearly a complicated issue with many, many factors. I would like us to get more informed by the experts through a task force of Article 23. And I would like us to refer Article 24 or vote no action until we get those answers. We will get these answers in time for fall town meeting, which is in time to change course in Driscoll if that's what the policymakers decide. Thank you.
Ms. Daly? I think you need to unmute yourself, Ms. Daly.
I'm unmuted. I'm also just waiting for slides.
Okay, we can hear you.
Great. Good evening. I'm Susan Helms Daly, town meeting member in Precinct 1 and co-petitioner with Clint Richmond, Dr. Claire Stamfer, and Andy Fisher of 24. I have a master's degree in environmental management. I'm part of the Mothers Out Front leadership team. I'm also a Brookline Schools parent and even a former soccer coach. Next slide, please. There are 4 key components of warrant Article 24. A 3-year moratorium on new artificial turf fields in Brookline, a decision we can always undo later. After 3 years, any new artificial turf must be PFAS free. The scheduled turf replacements at Skyline and Seoul are not affected. And starting in 2030, any replacement artificial turf must also be PFAS free. Next slide, please. We are proposing this 3 years to allow time for 3 things: the results of the many ongoing studies around the world studying artificial turf, including how best to test for PFAS in turf, the development of turf that does not contain PFAS, and for the town to find additional locations for grass fields to dilute the intensity of their use. Next slide. Artificial turf may allow for more playing days than grass, but we believe the cons outweigh this pro. In fact, outweigh isn't even the right word. They really eclipse it altogether. Because can you really weigh kids' health versus inconvenience? Artificial turf contains PFAS and other toxins. Manufacturers refuse to disclose the contents of artificial turf, but we know this through independent testing. It must be torn up and thrown out every 10 years. Even the new versions of turf are significantly hotter than any other surface. It is terrible for the climate. and it represents a loss of multi-use green space. Let's dig a little deeper into these. Next slide, please. As you've heard, PFAS do not break down over time. There is no half-life for them, like with nuclear products. There are over 12,000 of them. Why does that matter? Well, it explains why you can't realistically study and regulate them individually. You can't ethically do dose response tests on humans with poisons. And this is the reason that there isn't a body of peer-reviewed literature on them. Yet there are documented health effects from PFAS on the liver, thyroid, metabolism, development, and other conditions. It's also been linked to cancer, which is why a number of companies, states, and other entities are phasing them out or banning them in certain products. Next slide, please. Armies of experts are engaged in the effort to regulate PFAS. The EPA on its website says we have a PFAS crisis. The CDC has a whole newsletter devoted to PFAS. Mass DEP recently put forth a PFAS drinking water standard of 20 parts per trillion with a T. TURI and the OECD are also doing important work. Next slide, please. Here again is the DEP map showing the towns in red that already have levels of PFAS in their drinking water above the safe limit. This is alarming, and it won't get any less alarming if we continue to put PFAS out into the world. Who else is alarmed? Next slide, please. Maura Healy is alarmed. Last week, she sued some key PFAS manufacturers, saying they are accountable for poisoning our drinking water. Next slide, please. The Interagency Task Force is alarmed. In April, they recommended the Commonwealth do more to crack down on PFAS. Next slide, please. Jack McCarthy is alarmed. He's the executive director of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which along with other groups is targeting toxic chemicals in school building projects, including 3 of the most toxic chemical classes in building materials: PFAS, flame retardants, and antimicrobials. You may say, wait, this only mentions the interiors of schools, but can we really take comfort from that? Given the direct contact that kids will have with artificial turf for every single recess and many gym classes for the 9 years they attend a K-8 school like Driscoll. Next slide, please. This brings us to the precautionary principle, a concept widely used in laws and treaties and situations like this. It states that if there are good indications that something is potentially quite dangerous, even if you don't have categorical proof, you don't take the risk. You hit pause. Next slide. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about how much waste artificial turf generates. Replacing it every 10 years, as you are obliged to do once you start down this path, leads to over 100 tons of solid waste per field per replacement. And the disposal cost alone is typically $350,000. You may have heard manufacturers' claims that it can be recycled. And I know this may come as a shock, but those companies are not telling the truth. AstroTurf was invented by Monsanto, makers of Roundup, that harmless herbicide that recently led to a $10 billion cancer settlement. So pardon my skepticism. Next slide. And let's talk for a moment about how hot artificial turf is compared to grass. Not an issue in New England, you say? These are measurements taken this month in Brookline, showing an average of 44-degree disparity between grass and turf. Increased temperatures lead to a higher risk of heat-related illness and dehydration, especially in children, especially in a warming world. Next slide, please. This body has committed Brookline to becoming carbon neutral by 2040. Were those hollow feel-good words? Because we cannot get there if we put down more turf, a petroleum product that emits greenhouse gases throughout and after its useful life in favor of natural grass, which is known to sequester carbon. Next slide, please. Several other towns, and these are just the ones in Massachusetts, have enacted or are weighing moratoriums on artificial turf, including Sharon, Concord, Wayland, Oak Bluffs, and Nantucket. Next slide, please. And these are the committees and other groups that have endorsed 24. Next slide, please. The bottom line is, we know enough now, without a task force studying the issue for another 8 weeks, to choose safe and healthy playing fields for our kids. Please vote no on the motion to refer, no on the Driscoll exclusion, and regardless of how you vote on 23, because you can be in favor of both, please vote yes on the main motion. Thank you so much for your time.
He's unmuted. He can talk.
Go ahead, Ms. Benka.
Good evening, Carla Benka, Town Meeting Member Precinct 14, speaking for the Advisory Committee. My comments will address both Articles 23 and 24, and I'll start with Article 24. This article, is proposed and subsequently amended by the petitioners, has two major components. First, it would prohibit the replacement of any existing artificial turf field after 2030 unless the new material were tested and proven to be free of organic fluorine. Thus, replacing the turf field at Skyline Park, scheduled for fiscal 24, could go forward, as could replacing the turf field at Sewell Recreation, scheduled for fiscal 27. Second, Article 24 would prohibit the creation of new artificial turf fields on any town-owned property for 3 years, and after that time, permit artificial turf only if tested and certified to be free of organic fluorine. The recent amendment filed by town meeting members Hatchett and Khan excludes from the moratorium the new artificial turf field currently planned for the Driscoll School. If town meeting reaches a vote on that amendment, the advisory committee recommends favorable action. Article 23 takes a different approach, calling for the appointment of a task force made up of members with a wide range of professional backgrounds and experiences that will enable them to provide data and other fact-based information necessary to develop an informed and comprehensive athletic field surface policy. Town meeting has heard and will continue to hear arguments for and against artificial turf fields and for and against Article 24. There are many such arguments, and the issues they raise are complex because they involve the environment, climate change mitigation, evolving scientific research, the mental, physical, and emotional health of our children, limited options for additional recreation space, and last but not least, finite funds. Taking all of this into consideration, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on Article 23 as amended by the select board. It should be noted that the committee, the petitioner, and the select board are all on the same page here. The motion before you calls for the select board, in consultation with the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Advisory Council on Public Health, to appoint a task force on athletic field surfaces. It adds climate change mitigation to the list of issues to be considered by the task force and charges the task force with presenting decision guidelines to the Park and Recreation Commission as the commission develops an athletic field surface policy. The advisory committee believes that the responsibility for creating this policy, as with other policies pertaining to recreation activities and recreation facilities, should rest with the commission. By a vote of 20-1 with no abstentions, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on the select board's amended motion under Article 23, found in Supplement 1 of Article 23. Further, the advisory committee believes that the task force described in Article 23 with its diverse perspectives and expertise will be helpful in pinpointing the critical factors that should be considered in developing a policy that seeks to strike a balance between the justifiable but conflicting concerns and goals expressed by the supporters and opponents of Article 24. Therefore, by a vote of 20-1 with no abstentions, the advisory committee recommends favorable action to refer Article 24 as presented in Supplement 4 of Article 24. And lastly, if the motion to refer fails, then the advisory committee, by a vote of 16-2 with 2 abstentions, recommends favorable action on the Hatchett-Kahn amendment to exempt the new Driscoll School field from the moratorium. Thank you.
I don't hear it at all. Say it again.
Ms. Rowland? Reaner. Okay, Ms. Rowland, go ahead.
Okay, great. Are my slides available, please? Thank you. Good evening. My name is Arden Reamer, Town Meeting Member Precinct 8. First slide, please. Thank you. During my 3-minute presentation tonight, you will see a slideshow of pictures from the Florida Ruffin Ridley School play area surrounding the organic cork and coconut fill turf field. Next slide, please. These areas pictured were specifically included in the design because folks at the time felt there needed to be more grass play areas. What should become very clear very quickly is that in actuality, there is almost no grass and almost all mud. Next slide, please. I am in a butter to the Florida Ruffin Ridley School's organic cork and coconut fill turf playing field and playgrounds and have lived here since it was a tufted grass and compacted dirt field. In addition, I am a parent of a 7th grader at the school and a Brookline High School student who just completed a season of track and field on the Downs turf field. I was a member of the Devotion School, as it was named in that time period, building committee. Next slide, please. The following is a personal testimony to back up the critical, even dire need to consider turf fields when undertaking a playing field renovation in our community. Next slide, please. The past Devotion School grass field was a disaster. A K-8 school field is played on almost continually from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, after school and on the weekends. In spring and fall, there is recreation play scheduled at almost all times during daylight hours and often well into the evenings. Because of this continuous need, the prior grass playing field was rarely grass. Instead, it was mud or dirt emitting massive dust bowls on windy days that would blow onto a butter's properties. Next slide, please. In addition, grass playing fields are closed for the month of March in Brookline to rehabilitate from the winter, rendering a month out of service by necessity. In summary, a K-8 grass field is rarely grass, but in actuality, mud or dirt. Next slide, please. As a member of the building committee for the new Ruffin Ridley School, we spent countless hours researching, seeking medical advice, reading scientific information, listening to professionals and doctors, weighing benefit cost analyses, and determining fill options before deciding to include the organic cork and coconut fill turf field versus grass. It was a careful, thoughtful, scientific, and needs-based decision. In summary, the building committee conducted an exhaustive research process when opting for a turf field at the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. Next slide, please. I have also been impacted directly as well as observed the smaller grass areas that were included just so there would be grass in the play area at the school. They quickly turned to mud with approximately 900 students playing on them 5 days a week. My son slipped in mud multiple times to the extent that I had to bring a change of clothes to him during the school day because he was so muddy. My daughter ruined a pair of sneakers just walking through it. Next slide, please. It got so muddy or dirty within the first few years that I and a couple of other parents implored Erin Galantine, then head of Parks and Open Space, to redesign the space to minimize the grass, which she obliged by creating walkways, planting trees, and putting in picnic tables. In summary, the grass included in the Ruffin Ridley School play area design was rendered unusable and had to be redesigned. I too am adamant about saving our planet and combating the climate crisis, but not at the expense of the health and well-being of Brookline's children. Thank you for your consideration. Please vote yes on Article 23, yes on the motion to refer Article 24, or yes on the Hatchet-Kahn amendment and no on the main motion. Thank you.
Ms. Ashkenazi?
Thank you. Miriam Ashkenazi speaking on behalf of the majority of the select board. You will also hear from the minority select board view from my colleague, John Van Scoyac. I won't repeat what I said last night for warrant Article 22, but I do want to add some important relevant points. We need to take the same thoughtful population health lens to the discussion of artificial turf as we did last night with these other consumer products we evaluated. For the same reasons we referred warrant Article 22 to a moderator's committee, the select board voted unanimously to support the motion under Article 23 as amended by the Financial Advisory Committee and the select board. This calls for the select board in consultation with Park and Rec, Advisory Council on Public Health to appoint an expert task force to write a report summarizing facts and trade-offs between artificial turf and natural grass, and to draft decision guidelines for use by the town of Brookline in time for next town meeting, in time to make changes to Driscoll. While it seems like an easy solution to have a moratorium or ban artificial turf outright, the reality is much more complicated, and a thoughtful policy is required to balance the risk and benefits. Yes, there are benefits to artificial turf. Our kids need places to play, especially now as we struggle with the effects of the pandemic and those effects on our children's health. Brookline has a dearth of playing fields for our kids, and New England weather makes this even more challenging. Artificial turf has evolved and continues to do so. The particular fields infield for Driscoll and at Florida Rough and Ridley would be a mix, well, at Driscoll would be a mix of coconut husks and sand, and has been certified PFAS free. And just like we have at Ridley, because of the coconut husks, it doesn't have the same risk of heat islands. Not once has an artificial turf field been closed in Brookline because of heat or rain. We cannot say the same of the grass fields or frankly of the tennis courts apparently. And while there is a great debate going on about how inclusive and public the process was around the decision for the use of artificial turf at Driscoll, there was a public process. The school committee and Park and Rec Commission set up a joint public design review committee made up of school committee members, Park and Rec commissioners, and members of the public. There were 4 public meetings focused on just the school playground and field design, in addition to meetings with school PE staff and teachers and reviews at the school building meetings. Meetings were noticed in the tab, sent to nearly 800 property owners, posted on the town's website, and sent through the Driscoll School website and email updates. The current design, inclusive of the synthetic turf field, is the result of input from parents, students, teachers, and neighbors based on that process. Regardless of where you land on the side of this debate, the solution is not a ban or a moratorium, but yes, more process. We should have thoughtful, scientific, and population-based policies based on process. Warrant Article 24 wholesale bypasses this process, any process for that matter, while Warrant Article 23 adds to it. This balance between risk and benefit is one that needs to be carefully weighed, and having a process in place to do that is imperative. This is why the select board voted 5-0 in favor of Warrant Article 23 as amended by the select board for a more nuanced, thoughtful policy approach. We voted 4-1 to refer Warrant Article 24 to a task force. We voted 2-3 no action on the Hatchet-Kahn amendment and 4-1 against Warrant Article 24 if there was no referral. It's very confusing, I'm sorry. We urge you to vote in favor of Warrant Article 23, and in essence, either to refer Warrant Article 24 or no action. I'm going to cede the rest of my time to Erin Galentine, who will talk a little bit about the impacts of these warrant articles on the department.
Good evening. My name is Erin Valentine, Commissioner of Public Works. My department with Parks and Open Spaces lead is responsible for management and maintenance of park, schools, and public grounds, including the town's athletic fields. Select Board member Dr. Ashkenazi asked that I provide information as it relates to care, access, and playability of the town's athletic fields, specifically through the lens of natural versus synthetic turf. Synthetic turf fields provide a reliable, safe, and even playing surface for areas programmed over 800 hours, while natural grass fields do not. Given best management and maintenance practices, including our organics program, we can look at hours and type of use to predict the condition of our playing fields. This is probably a bit confusing, as you would assume that the maintenance and care of a field is the greatest predictor of the overall quality. In actuality, hours and type of use are the most significant factors in the overall quality, no matter what the maintenance plan includes. As I mentioned last week, programming less than 200 hours per year will support an excellent condition field. 400 to 600 hours of use, good condition. 600 to 800 hours is good to fair. 800 to 1,000 hours is moving from fair to poor, and over 1,000 hours of use will yield predictably poor condition fields, no matter your inputs of fertilization, seed, irrigation, and agronomic practices. Between school, after school usage, summer camp, and youth soccer, the school athletic field is programmed between 800 and 1,000 hours each year. As for costs, a synthetic turf field costs more to install and less to maintain, whereas a natural grass field costs less to install but more to maintain. Based on a 2019 comparative analysis of actual costs using the square footage of Downs Field as the model, we found that the cost of a natural grass field was about 70% less over a 20-year period than synthetic turf. However, if you were to compare two good quality natural and synthetic playing fields, the cost per hour of use is 300% more for the natural grass field than the synthetic field, due to the number of programmed hours of use over the life of the asset. Two different ways to look at cost. To date, synthetic turf fields have proven to be an important asset within our parks and open space network that ranges from passive conservation land to active recreation facilities and everything in between. As a community of 60,000, our desire is to serve all ages and abilities and provide a variety of opportunities to everyone to lead a healthy, well-balanced, and active lifestyle. Ultimately, it's our job to care for whatever assets the town desires. We just feel it's important the community understand that based on the hours and type of usage in our various fields, there's a limit to what quality can be expected and delivered. Thank you.
Mr. Gillis?
Good evening, Matthew Gillis, Director of Operations from the School Department. I'm pretty much going to cede my time. Dr. Ashkenazi summarized part of what I was going to say fairly well, and I believe Susan Wolf-Ditkoff will be speaking on it later. She lived through the whole process, and I will cede time to that, since she is also been a former school committee member and a member of town meeting.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connor? Nancy O'Connor?
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator, for having me here this evening. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you, all of us here tonight. We are all volunteers working towards a better Brookline. In particular, I want to extend my sincerest thanks to John Bain, the outgoing chair of the Park and Rec Commission, for his over 30 years of service to the town. It is in his time on the Park and Recreation Commission, John never missed a single meeting, even after his life-saving surgery a number of years ago. John will not be seeking reappointment at the end of his term this fall, and I just wanted to extend our thanks for his tireless advocacy for the Brookline Parks and Recreation Departments. In regards to warrant Article 23, the Park and Recreation Commission supports creating a task force to study synthetic fields in Brookline, voting 7-0. The commission voted no action on warrant Article 24 with a vote of 6-1. There's a shortage of usable playing fields in town, and I think you've heard some of that already. Our recreation department has extensive athletic programming, and our high school athletic department offers a robust number of sports for our student athletes. Having a playable field is of the utmost importance for safety and playability. You heard from the BHS athletic director, Pete Rittenberg, last week about the need for some synthetic playing fields in our inventory of fields. Synthetic playing fields are specifically highly desirable during the off-season and the shoulder seasons. Our playing fields are typically closed for the month of March due to melting snow and extremely wet conditions. Playing on a wet field, whether it be people or dogs, damages the natural grass turf. The spring season begins in mid-March. However, most years we cannot allow our student athletes onto the fields until after April 1st, typically for the first day of tryouts. This puts our student athletes at a disadvantage behind other competing communities, not to mention a scramble for the students and coaches in determining the team's composition. Our Parks Division works tirelessly on our playing fields. Dave Mellor, who, if you don't know, is the grass guy at Fenway Park, would not be able to produce a pristine playing field here in Brookline at our current level of programming. We do not have enough fields to rest them without the risk of taking some programming offline, and who would that be? And the goal is to keep residents, youth, and adults alike outside recreating. Finally, I leave you with some numbers real quick. At Skyline Park alone, the estimated usage for Brookline High School and Brookline Recreation combined is as follows. For spring, summer, and fall, a total of 34 weeks, there were 238 days of permitted use. A total number of permitted hours for all seasons is 1,373. The total number of individual hours based on 30 players per hour was 41,205 player hours. And finally, in 2021, the total of the 3 seasons where grass fields were closed during permitted hours was 55 days. I urge you to consider favorable action on Article 23 so that the commission can further study and evaluate the options of synthetic turf in Brookline, and to vote against Article 24's moratorium. Thank you all very much.
Mr. Van Scoyac.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm John Van Scoik, and I am a minority of one on the select board. I think a lot of the presentations you've heard tonight were excellent on both sides. And I am not going to weigh in on the science of PFAS, although I side with Article 24. I do want to weigh in on what I think is an important element of this consideration of natural grass versus artificial turf. And that is, what does our gut tell us? What does our heart tell us? What does our thinking tell us about natural fields and their desirability versus artificial fields and their artificiality? And I can't emphasize that enough. There's nature and then there's plastic. And I'm on the side of nature. I was on the side of cypress being natural grass, and I'm glad I was. I'm glad the town made that decision. I think that the case that has been made for artificial turf, it's all well and good, but we know that somehow people got by for many, many years without artificial turf. And we also know that schools all over Brookline today get by with grass. And you know, I'm not going to argue the case of Florida Ruff and Ridley School. I did notice during the presentation, it looked to me like there are design issues. It looked to me like, ask yourself, why did the natural grass portion get so trampled? An awful lot of kids must have wanted to run back and forth on that natural grass for it to get that trampled. And maybe there should have been more natural grass, not such a small portion of natural grass. But I'll put that aside because I want to just quickly share an anecdote. On a very, very hot day, it was that day not too long ago, 2 weeks ago, I would say, where they thought we were going to set a record for heat in May. My wife and I took a walk along Leverett Pond. And as we were walking along Leverett Pond, we could hear shouts of joy from children on the other side of the pond, the Jamaica Plain side of the pond, where there is and has for a long time been a baseball field with a natural grass outfield. And they were having a great time on what was easily one of the hottest days ever in May. And then to the other side of where we were walking, there was what is known as Downs Field. And it's all artificial. And it was sitting there baking in the sun, and no one was playing on it. No one in their right mind would play on it. There was some natural grass to the side where there was a gentleman walking a dog and another person having a conversation with him. And I thought, there's probably any number of people who would be more than happy to sit down on that field of grass on this hottest day of May. No one would want to sit down on that field of artificial turf. And it speaks a lot to the comparisons that keep getting made to natural grass that occasionally needs extra care and occasionally gets rained on. Well, how about artificial turf that is unusable when it's too hot? How about artificial turf that is unusable for any purpose except soccer in some
Could
cases?
you wrap up, please, Mr. Vanskoyak?
Or related. And I'll wrap up. I think I've made clear I'm addressing this from emotions, but also from what we feel to be true. And that's what I wanted to get across tonight as to why I differed with my select board colleagues. Thank you very much.
Ms. Charlupski and Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff and your crew. Helen Charlupski. Valerie, Ms. Frias.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Valerie Frias, Precinct 13 and School Committee. I'm going to cede most of my time to my colleagues, but I did want to report on the vote of the School Committee. By a vote of 8-1, the School Committee supported warrant Article 23, and by a vote of 4 to 3 to 2, opposed warrant Article 24. I would like to cede my time to the folks, although I'm the current Driscoll School Building Chair on the school side. I'd like to cede my time to Susan Wolf-Ditkoff, who chaired through this 4-year community process, Principal David Euclid, Victor Kusman, and Derek Hatchett. So first up would be Susan. Thank you.
Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. I have some slides, if those could get teed up. Good evening, Mr. Assistant Moderator. My name is Susan Wolf-Ditkoff. I use she pronouns. I'm the parent of 3 children, and like all of you parents, I worry about their health and safety every single day. I'm a former school committee member, former Driscoll Building Committee chair, and I also chaired the task force on school reopening, where I and many of you heard firsthand these heartrending stories month after month about parents worried about their children's social emotional health, their physical activity, and all of that. So, but what I'm here today to do is to talk to you about one very specific question, which is the community process that was quite inclusive and who had input into it. So here's the headline. As you'll see in the coming slides, There were at least 11 separate boards and commissions who discussed and voted to approve all-weather turf play. This happened over more than 3 years, but really since 2014. Literally hundreds and hundreds of parents and residents participated in those meetings. And we did a lot of work to make sure the outreach was inclusive. So many of the meetings were held at Driscoll School, the rest were held at Town Hall. They were held in person and online to include increased participation in the mornings and in the evenings at times that were convenient to families. And so what you'll see, I will just take you very, very quickly through a couple of slides because I understand you may have heard some very troubling comments about the lack of process. So next slide, please. I will not actually start in 2014 because I only have a minute and a couple minutes. But in March of 2019, there was the first community forum of this process. And on the left, you'll see the top priority was a field regularly not usable because of wet or muddy conditions. And this was in 2014. An unusable playing field was a critical community concern. In 2019, it was still a top concern based on data and evidence from the parents and their ability and their children's ability to use the field. Next slide, please. May of 2019, the schematic design report came out. It cited 3 separate documents where turf was specifically discussed at the building committee level and in the cost estimate processes in 2019, where synthetic turf was referenced specifically. Next slide, please. Moving forward to January of 2020, there was, as Miriam Ashkenazi said, there was a specific community forum for the parks and playground issues. There were residents, it was an inclusive process to apply to it, and they were chosen, and everything was subject to open meeting. And in the first of those community forums, all 3 test fit options specifically used the word synthetic playfield. They were well attended. This first one, I think, had something like 50 people who attended at Driscoll's. This is before the pandemic. Next slide, please. The second of 4, again, if you look at the bottom left, the overwhelming response from the parents and the community was that synthetic turf was preferred, coconut fiber infill, not rubber, and no grass between the synthetic turf and the school because it turns to mud, as Ms. Reamer mentioned in the Florida Ruffin Ridley example. Next slide, please. May 13th was the 3rd of 4 park and playground community forums. Again, you'll see the words synthetic turf. Next slide, please. May 6th was the 4th of 4 town of Brookline community meetings. You'll again see the words synthetic turf field. Widely attended. Next slide, please. This being Brookline, we had a 5th of 4 community forums, just to make sure that it was clear. Synthetic playfield, again, is on the slides, and on the bottom right are the actual slide numbers. Next slide, please. June 17th, the town planning board had a design advisory team who discussed this. Next slide, please. On November 5th, the zoning board of appeals discussed this, page 10, again, synthetic playfield. Next slide. And on December 15th, we had a trees meeting for Driscoll. Again, the word synthetic playfield appeared in a widely attended community forum. Next slide. May 28th of 2021, again, the words appeared. I didn't actually find the October 20th planning board meeting, but it was discussed there as well. Next slide. And since I only have 2 minutes, which I've overgone, you can find all of the rest of these documents online, dozens of public meetings, many conversations, dedicated PTO meetings from over 3 specific meetings in the cafeteria and in the library. And in summary, synthetic turf has been a top priority of the Driscoll community for nearly a decade. And I suspect many of them would be quite surprised to see an end run around that consistent advocacy, even as I understand others may disagree now, but there was a quite robust process, which is documented if anyone wants to find it. So thank you very much.
Does that conclude your presentation, Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff? Okay, Ms. Hatchett. Casey Hatchett.
Good evening. My name is Casey Hatchett, town meeting member precinct 10, and co-sponsor with Janice Kahn of this amendment, of the amendment
for warrant article 24, seeking an exemption for the Driscoll School field from the proposed moratorium. My husband Derek and I have 4 kids, and in total, my family will spend 45 student years at Driscoll School. In all our years there thus far, the town has never been successful in growing grass and providing a safe, usable surface for outdoor activities and sports. The field at Driscoll, when not closed for seating or for wet weather, has always been hazardous. It's a dangerous combination of compact dirt and rock, which has caused many injuries to our own children and many others over the years. The Driscoll School synthetic field is the best solution to providing children usable outdoor space, a place where they can play, engage in outdoor activity, learn about teamwork, stay active, and participate in healthy behaviors, which will help fend off childhood obesity and depression, which is never more important than at this time as we struggle with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. This spring, my family has been in a total of 6 field sport teams, and not one of them has practices or games in North Brookline. We must travel to Skyline, Newton, Acton, Leominster, Plymouth, and beyond for field space. And due to COVID, our carpool options have been extremely limited. The lack of usable fields in North Brookline is extremely unfair to children, particularly ones whose parents cannot drive them because they work, don't have cars, or struggle with other constraints. Children who cannot get to Skyline or Sewell and South Brookline and beyond simply cannot participate, and often that is the most marginalized children in our community. The new Driscoll field will help to mitigate the inequitable access to field space. It will reduce travel and vehicle emissions and will ensure that more kids have athletic and outdoor opportunities, not just wealthy kids who can join club sports and travel. The limited field space available in Brookline also means our programming is unable to grow, and going forward, programming may need to be curtailed, as we heard from the Brookline High School Athletic Director, Pete Rittenberg, last week at advisory. Meanwhile, warrant article 26 seeks to grow our youth recreational programming to address the same equity and accessibility issues. We can do the right thing now and move forward with synthetic turf at Driscoll, where it is overwhelmingly welcomed by the school community and not just by the sports community, and address the issues of equity and accessibility. As you heard, the Driscoll building community held public meetings for over 4 years. During that time, there's been a great deal of community input into the design and the new campus. This field has been incorporated into the specifications after a lengthy public process and design, and has been set and approved. The last minute attempt to change the design feels really unfair to a community that has waited this long to finally have a field they can use, and to many volunteers who have worked to make the Driscoll project a reality, and to the town staff who have answered every question and attended every meeting to ensure this project meets the needs of our community. I trust our health department, our public works department, our parks department, and our park and recs commission to do what is safest for our children and balance with maintaining our green space and mitigating environmental impacts. When I asked Commissioner Galantine about the Marblehead case study, which has been circulating within at least our precinct in 10, about their approach to organic grass field, and if this approach would be successful at Driscoll, providing a better outcome than the proposed synthetic field, she replied in short, no. They have attempted about 95% of what we see in studies that has been successful, and it is simply not successful at Driscoll Field. So I ask you to please vote no on warrant article 24, or vote to refer to a study committee that is established either under 23 or 24. And if these votes are unsuccessful, please vote on the Hatchet-Kahn amendment to ensure that Driscoll project stays on track as designed and budgeted. Thank you.
Ms. Khan?
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Janice Khan, and Janice Khan with remarks. Speaking in favor of the amendment on warrant article 24. So I'm a co-petitioner along with Driscoll parent Casey Hatchett from Precinct 10. This amendment asks the town meeting allow the Driscoll School Building Advisory Committee to complete its work without the preemption by town meeting. My concern is one of process, and we saw Susan Wolf-Ditkoff's extensive explanation of the process that has already taken place. The School Building Advisory Committee has been working on building a new Michael Driscoll School since at least June of 2018. So there have been many opportunities for community engagement with the Driscoll School community, including parents, teachers, and staff, as well as neighbors living near the school. Full disclosure, I represent Precinct 15, and I have not been involved in this long process. But by that metric, I stand with the representatives from a great majority of other precincts voting here this evening. So community engagement is a Brookline value that is expressed in many of the warrant articles that come before our town meeting. I ask this legislative body to honor that value and vote in favor of the amendment to exempt the Driscoll Field from warrant Article 24, much like it voted to exempt the field at Skyline Park after the debate on that capital improvements project. The question for me is, should the members of the Driscoll community be allowed to work out the details of the field within their community, or should town meeting put its thumb on the scale? And I stand with the Driscoll community. Warrant Article 24 is drafted by the petitioners, exempted 4 existing artificial turf fields, including 2 on or near school grounds at Sewell and at the Ridley School. The Driscoll parents who are writing as town meeting members now need to voice their concerns to the Driscoll School Building Advisory Committee, which is the group tasked with the building of the new school campus. I urge town meeting to vote favorable action on the advisory committee's referral motion on warrant Article 24. And if that fails, to please vote yes on the amendment to exempt the Driscoll Field. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
If I can cede my time to Dr. Linos, please.
Say it again. Dr. Linos?
Thank you very much, Assistant Moderator. I was signed up to speak, but I'm pretty low down. So if you get to my name, maybe you can call on Andrew Fisher. My name is Natalia Linos. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 6. I'm also the chair of the Advisory Council on Public Health. And so tonight, I want to summarize our conversations and votes at ACPH on Articles 23 and 24, as well as add some of my personal perspective as a social epidemiologist who studies health equity and as someone who has worked on climate change and health, both in the US and globally. So on April 14th, following a public hearing, the Advisory Council on Public Health voted in favor of warrant Article 24, with 4 in favor, 2 opposed, for a 3-year moratorium on synthetic turf. ACPH members, a number of whom are pediatricians, recognize the value of physical activity and green spaces to health. However, they express significant concerns around the health risks, known and unknown, including exposure to PFAS, which can have particular impacts on child development, the buildup of heat on turf fields, making them potentially dangerous to play on summer days now and in the future, as well as unique risks for injury. Several members, including myself, also stress that the climate emergency is a public health emergency. It's a crisis, and ACPH should not support measures that take us in the wrong direction, and that we must consider health equity impacts, including the fact that these turf fields, which can't be recycled, will likely be incinerated in communities that already bear a disproportionate impact from pollution. ACPH members also felt that a 3-year moratorium would send a strong signal to industry that communities are paying attention to the health and environmental impacts of their products and incentivize them to address both the materials they are using and obstacles to recycling at the end of life. The Advisory Council also voted no action for warrant Article 23, 4-1. While this may seem unexpected, and indeed the ACPH supports the intent of warrant Article 23 to review the literature on the health harms of synthetic turf, consider trade-offs and potential unintended consequences of a given decision, the ACPH felt that the timeline was simply too short and required the attention of a health department that is already overstretched and must be focusing on COVID right now. So personal note, I urge you not to refer this motion. It is not the right time in the middle of a surge. While the timeline, and now moving more to my personal notes, while the timeline has been expanded slightly for warrant Article 23, and I personally now believe that warrant Article 23 can help us get started, I still worry that it is unrealistic to believe that experts can come to consensus in just a few months, and that our community can have the difficult conversations around trade-offs in a participatory manner needed to develop a plan that works for our densely populated community, our health, and our environment. That will take time afforded to us by a 3-year moratorium. So I will be voting yes on both warrant Article 23 to get us started and warrant Article 24 using the precautionary principle that urges us to pause in the face of uncertainty. We undoubtedly have a need for both recreation and green space. And today it feels like we have been presented with a false dichotomy that we must choose between sports and the health of our kids. I believe we can do better, and 3 years will give us the time we need to continue the conversation, not just for experts to discuss, but also for our community to ask questions like, can we use spaces like our golf fields for more equitable access to athletics? Can we be comfortable with some fields that are good to fair quality and some that are excellent? Should we have a different level of risk tolerance for the youngest kids who are still developing and therefore their exposure to PFAS could be detrimental versus older high school children? And how will we address equity considerations? And a quick side note, I have worked on health equity for a very long time, and there are clear equity arguments on both sides. So I would urge those of you who care about equity to vote yes on warrant Article 26, which is the only warrant article which explicitly focuses on equity and recreation. So in conclusion, using a precautionary principle, which urges us to consider the potential harms to human health and to our environment, even in the absence of established causal inference, I urge you to vote in favor of warrant Article 24 and to give our town the time we need to consider the trade-offs ahead of us. It is a difficult conversation to be having tonight. I respect many on all sides. I think we need these 3 years. Thank you so much.
Ms. Cunningham, you have a point of order?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that a lot of the speakers so far seem to be speaking on from one point of view, but I also wanted to say that Mary Sablosi is on the speaker list, but she's not speaking, and I wanted to see if you could replace her with Jessie Gray.
You know, Ms. Cunningham, I don't believe you're still a town meeting member, and therefore you can't make a point of order. I'm sorry. So, Ms. McClellan?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're fine.
Great. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Nicole McClelland, and I'm speaking on behalf of, in favor of warrant Article 24 tonight. I'm really glad to be here tonight to have a chance to represent many voices in the Driscoll community who are not able to be at the table when this decision was made to use artificial turf at the new Driscoll School. To be sure, there was certainly some process around this decision, and I am appreciative of the efforts of the Driscoll Building Committee. However, the reaction I've gotten in talking to parents, caregivers, and other community members has made me realize the process simply wasn't broad or concerted enough to engage all community members. I actually really appreciate that Susan Wolf-Dickoff showed the presentations and the notes from the various community forums, because that's exactly what I wanted to convey tonight. March 2019 was the last Driscoll Community Forum where the question of turf versus grass was still appeared to be undecided, was still open. March 2019, over 3 years ago. After that, there was a 9-month gap before the next community forum in January of 2020. And at that forum, multiple different options for the outdoor space were presented. But as you saw in Susan's presentation, every one of them specified the use of synthetic turf. The same was true at every community forum after that. Synthetic turf was presented as the only option. How was that decision made and by whom? It's not robust public engagement if one of the most critical decisions has already been decided and is being presented to the community as a done deal. What happened in those 9 months after March 2019, I don't know, but here's what didn't happen. An email from school leadership seeking parental input specifically about the playing field choice, email or notice or listening or info session by the PTO with the Driscoll Building Committee, a notice to community members specifying that a decision was being made between turf and grass, and any agenda item that specifically noted that a decision was being made specifically about synthetic turf. And just to be honest, calling the genuine efforts of concerted parents to engage and be heard about this and run is disappointing. And I think that's part of what makes community members feel dismissed. It's important to emphasize that the current Driscoll plan includes no grass, not a single square foot of grass. This has also been a surprise to many parents. And unlike signing your child up for organized sports, for those whose children attend Driscoll, the youngest of whom will spend 9 years on whatever field we have, there is no opt-out. Whatever field we have is what our children will use for PE and recess day after day, year after year. And please remember that little kids lay on fields, they roll on fields. And when we're talking about heat and particulates, their faces are often very close to the ground. You know, it's not just sort of big kids that we're talking about the little kids too. You've heard Mr. Toffel state that we should hear from experts and not lay people. In just the past 48 hours, here are the people who have expressed grave concerns to me about the use of synthetic turf. And this is besides those people with credentials that you've heard from tonight. A chemist with 30 years of experience in plastics, a parent with a PhD in chemistry who works as an environmental consultant, 2 different epidemiologists, including, and I don't mean Natalia Linos, including one with particular knowledge about PFAS. I will admit I have been totally flabbergasted by the demand that people with concerns about plastic turf prove that it is unsafe. That is not how this should work. When it comes to a decision being made by leaders that will result in children spending collective many thousands of hours playing on a surface that will indubitably degrade and release microplastic particles over time into the air, into their lungs, onto their skin, the proof that needs to happen isn't that we who are concerned must prove that it is unsafe. What must be demonstrated is that it is safe, and that has not been done. 10 or 15 years ago, the Brookline Parks Department was confident that installing crumb rubber in multiple fields and playgrounds was safe. We still have crumb rubber being used in Brookline. The FDA said it was safe. Of course, the turf industry said it was safe. We now know this was wrong with devastating consequences. Fortunately, Brookline is now moving away from crumb rubber, but it's entirely reasonable to ask, what else do we not know? The infill may have some natural materials now, but the blades, the part that the kids will come into contact with day after day, year after year, are still plastic. What will the next surprise be? And it will be too late when we find out. I think we deserve, and our kids certainly deserve, proof that this is safe. And until we have it, we have a responsibility to hit pause and to not install any new turf until that proof exists. One final thing we don't have to prove is that turf is a serious net negative for the environment. This is self-evident. For a town that is committed to be carbon neutral, that has banned plastic bags and new gas pipelines and cutting down trees, it is inconsistent, to put it mildly, to make an exception for artificial
Speaking
turf.
for 4+ minutes.
Okay.
And would you please conclude your
Yes, I
presentation?
will. Yes, I will.
Thank you.
To make an exception for artificial turf for which the average field contains 40,000 pounds of plastic. So with that said, I would encourage you tonight to please vote in favor of warrant Article 24 without any exemptions for Driscoll. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. I was under a misunderstanding about the block of time allocated to Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff. And apparently there were 3 other speakers in that block that did not get to speak. So I'm going to call on them now. Please confine yourself to about a minute apiece, because that 7 minutes was already used up by Ms. Frias and Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff. David, you kill us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. So I'm speaking on behalf of the school, or myself and the school, Anthony Ricardo, one of our PE teachers. We feel that the installation of a turf field will be very beneficial to our physical education program at Driscoll School, as well as our after-school and athletic programs. In my experience in Brookline, having a turf field allows us to use the field longer throughout the school year. Our physical education program would benefit by having the use of this outdoor space to teach units such as soccer, ultimate frisbee, flag football, just to name a few. A grass field in Brookline would be closed frequently during heavy rain or snow, which limits the amount of teaching spaces that we can use outside the school. Grass fields usually take several days to dry out, enough so that it can be used by multiple classes throughout the day. Grass fields that are heavily used, as in the case of Driscoll, are often overstressed and result in creating dirt patches around the field, often creating unsafe situations for students. Having a turf field increases our time outside and would be a benefit to our physical education program at Driscoll, both during and after school. In addition, artificial fields outlive natural grass over the course of the season and over the course of years. Artificial turf fields have a lifespan of up to 10 years and are rugged and in year-round weather. Natural grass fields need major overhauls every 4 to 6 years and can be severely damaged by a major weather event. Artificial turf is easier and less expensive to maintain, doesn't require water or fertilizer, and accommodate a variety of activities. With artificial turf, students can practice on the field in almost any weather without damaging the ground. Also, artificial turf doesn't freeze in the winter or thin out in the summer. In my own experience, in my own hometown, the artificial turfs look amazing and have endured New England weather for many years now. Driscoll is a school that is based in the heart of a community that uses the fields for recreational activities similar to a local park. I believe that the community as a whole would benefit from a turf field that can be used year-round through all types of conditions. Thank you.
Mr. Ukilis, could you tell us what your position is? You didn't identify yourself, and we'd like to know what your relationship is to the Driscoll School.
Yes, I am the principal of the Driscoll School. Sorry about that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cusman, please give us your name and your position, please. Kusmin.
Sorry, I was not getting permission to unmute there. I'm Victor Cussman. I am a parent at the Driscoll School, a resident of Precinct 11. I would like to I'm also a member of the Driscoll Building Advisory Committee, as well as the Driscoll Playground Design Review Team, and would like to point out that I'm not generally a civically active person, nor am I apprised or aware of most of the activities and political actions that are going on in town. As much as I might like to be, I'm not. And the fact that I was aware enough to apply to be a member of those committees and to participate in those committees, to me, is indicative of the fact that it was a very open process, and the opportunity for people to participate was well advertised, including by myself. We heard from parents and teachers that an improved playfield was among their top priorities for the Driscoll Landscape Project, citing the poor condition and frequent closures of the old grass field. The pros and cons of synthetic turf, including PFAS and other environmental concerns, were discussed at multiple meetings. Both committees ultimately recommended synthetic turf as the best solution for the demands of the Driscoll project. These committees are comprised of paid town employees, elected officials, and community members like myself, with a wide range of relevant expertise, including landscape architecture, urban planning, facilities management, environmental science, and medicine. I personally am confident that the professional experience and motivations of these members of these committees are beyond sufficient to the task of making a carefully considered recommendation on the subject of synthetic turf. Yet, there are lingering health and environmental concerns within our community, and they are enough to warrant an even deeper evaluation. Therefore, I urge you to vote in favor of warrant Article 23. In contrast, I urge you to reject warrant Article 24, which would establish a townwide moratorium on synthetic turf, offering no alternatives, regardless of any committee recommendations, past or future. This moratorium will negatively impact our schools and parks for years to come by decreasing the availability and equity of playfields for education and athletics, as well as by shunting active recreation pressures to areas of the landscape intended for passive uses. Thank you.
Mr. Hatchett.
Hi there. My name is Derek Hatchett. Thanks, Victor, for talking. That was awesome. I've been a Brookline resident for over 30 years now, educating 4 of my children in Brookline schools, 2 of whom are still enrolled at Driscoll School. All my children are active. They spend a significant amount of time outdoors playing on various fields around the town, both public and private fields, both natural and artificial grass. I also serve, like Victor did, on the Driscoll Playground Design Review Committee, and I strongly support the town of Brookline installing synthetic turf at school outdoor fields and other fields such as Skyline. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation being shared that sort of wrongfully suggests that modern synthetic turf is unsafe for children. This is a red herring propagated by a vocal minority of Brookline residents who are trying to get a 3rd, 4th, and 5th bite at the proverbial apple because they didn't get their way the first time. The Driscoll School Playground Design Review Committee met numerous times throughout 2019 and 2020, which Ms. Dickoff detailed. We overwhelmingly agreed that a synthetic field provided the right balance of safety, usability throughout the year, maintenance, and overall cost. And if you observe the latest trends in synthetic field construction, as well as the installation of these fields throughout the Commonwealth and many towns and cities, such as Cambridge and Lexington, you'll likely come to the same conclusion as many other Brookline residents who support installing fields that use this type of surface. It's usable every single day. It needs no maintenance, water, pesticides, resodding, or mowing. The issue of building quality, usable outdoor fields for recreation is extremely important to me, as I see it directly tied to the livability of Brookline and how welcoming we are in our town to forward progress. So I'm in support of warrant Article 23 and exempting the Driscoll School Playground from the moratorium suggested in warrant Article 24. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mr. Gray? You have a point of order?
Yes, I'm struggling to understand the alternating between pro and con. I'm hearing a lot more con. I'm wondering if the moderator could explain the speaker order.
You want me to read the rest of the speakers? Mr. Gray?
No, I'm interested in how they were chosen to alternate and how that was related to the two major sides of this issue.
Well, let me read you the positions that the next several speakers will be espousing. And I think you'll get the sense that it's difficult to sort these out in any kind of rational way. Next speaker is 423. The speaker after that, 423. Speaker after that, for referral and the con amendment. Then speaker 424. Speaker against 23 and 424. A speaker against 423 and against 24. Six speakers, 424. Speaker 423. Speaker 423 and against 24, and so on. So I'm just going to take them in order and we'll see what happens. Ms. Ames? We'll hear from Ms. Ames, and then I'm going to take some questions or comments from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. My name is Wendy Sheridan Ames, and I was recently elected to a 3-year term as a town meeting member in Precinct 5. I'm also a member of the Park and Recreation Commission, though I'm speaking for myself tonight. I have 2 sons at Brookline High School and a daughter at Lincoln School, and they are all actively engaged in sports. Professionally, I own my own business. Though my husband is an emergency medicine physician, I am not a doctor, nor am I a scientist, but I have spent an extensive amount of time with Brookline children through recreation and sport participation, and I am very familiar with every single playing field in our town. I've been a volunteer coach for recreational level sports in Brookline for over 11 years. And I volunteer to coach not because I have an excessive amount of free time, but because I'm passionate about the role sports and recreation plays in the overall well-being of children. If you have not personally witnessed kids actively participating in field sports in Brookline, I highly encourage you to walk or bike by one of our many playing fields, including Downs or Skyline Park. There you will see anywhere from 25 to 225 kids on a field at one time. This level of activity is able to happen nearly year-round on our synthetic turf fields, but is reduced to a fraction of that time on our grass fields due to weather conditions and seasonal closures. Access to and participation in quality out-of-school time programming, including sport, is shown to contribute positively to the mental and physical well-being of children. Access to safe and reliable fields is critical for programming. And as I hope you're all aware by now, the demand is far greater than our capacity in Brookline. Given this, I believe we need to consider well-researched, innovative, and strategically placed turf fields like Downs and Skyline to help meet this demand. We need to work creatively to increase rather than decrease programming opportunities for our children in our community. In order to increase programming, our town must prioritize finding the spaces for these activities. I believe this issue of access and programming directly relates to warrant Article 23. The issue before us is complicated, and this cannot be reduced to an argument over grass, fields, or synthetic turf in a vacuum. It needs to be contemplated while taking into consideration the total scope of impact. We make choices every day that have costs and benefits, and some choices involve more risk than others. I care about our environment. I care about my kids, and I care about your kids as well, their health and their well-being. And I believe our policymaking and decision-making as a town needs to happen with all interested parties, all experts and stakeholders at the same table, hearing the same conversation, the same information, and the same facts. All too often, there are one-sided discussions by independent boards, committees, and commissions, and the full impact of decisions are not evaluated properly with our entire community. Let's come together and get this right the first time and bring back a well-considered, thorough report for town meeting in November 2020 this year. For this reason, I support and ask you to support warrant Article 23. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Penzel? Penzel.
Hi, thank you. I just had a question for.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm Mark Penzel, town meeting member, precinct 2. I'm sorry. I have a question for the proponents of 24 or anybody really, which is why are the Skyline and Sewell fields exempted when the hazards are equally as great as claimed as the Driscoll field? And why isn't there an option to support a turf field at Driscoll and potentially not support reinstallation of turf at Skyline and Sewell? Thanks.
Well, I'm not quite sure who to call on for this, but we'll try Ms. Daly.
Hi, Susan Helms Daly, town meeting member, precinct 1. Thank you for your question. This warrant article 24 is, we think of it as a compromise motion that recognizes the demand of the athletes in town, and it felt like too blunt of an instrument to take those away from the current players. You know, so what we opted for instead was to allow one round of replacement with the current technology, but by 2030, we would still require even the replacement of those fields to be PFAS free.
Thank you. Mr. Day?
Hi, yes. David Day, precinct 16. It seems like this debate, no one is wanting fewer fields or fewer and less access to fields. So the debate really isn't about whether we want fields or not. It's about what's the true health impacts of the artificial turf or not. And so this is really a question, which is, so the Article 23 asks for a study by a commission. Can we hear who will actually be on the commission that will be able to tell the town and town meeting when it comes to making a decision about this in the future, who will be on that committee that truly represents the health expertise that can address the key issue that we're actually debating, which is the health dangers, and not whether we want people to play on fields, which everyone wants. Thank you.
Mr. Toffel?
Sure, thanks for the question. So the categories of the people who we're asking to be on it are actually listed right there in the motion. So on, let's see, 23 supplement 1 in, let's see, the paragraph on page 2, it refers to many of the characteristics that I described that should be incorporated. Those expertise in these various areas should be incorporated in the group. So that's right there in the resolution. Now, this resolution is directed at the select board, and so it would be up to the select board to interview and select the individuals. But for example, the risk of injury, risk of user safety, end of life disposition, climate change issues. We want experts representing all of those views. I hope that's responsive.
Thank you. Mr. Berger?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Michael Berger, Precinct 15 Town Meeting Member, former Park and Rec Commissioner and soccer coach. And I'm a professor of chemistry at Simmons University and have conducted dozens of environmental risk assessments over the years. So one of the questions that I'd like to elaborate, and it dovetails well on the previous question, is will a proper environmental risk assessment process be used in the task force indicated by Article 23? And let me just describe what I mean by that. We've heard a lot about the toxicity of PFAS and other materials in artificial turf, but that doesn't determine what the hazard is to the users. It depends on the dose that the user has. In other words, the frequency, the duration, or the load of the contaminant per body weight per day. What is the route of exposure? Is it breathing? Is it dermal? Is it ingestion? And what is the vulnerability of the recipient? Are they little kids? Are they adults? That's going to make a big difference in the overall, what the DEP and the EPA calls the hazard index. It's essential that we do that. By the way, just to make the point fine, chlorinated pool water can pose a health risk, and its safety actually depends on a number of things. Chlorine, we all know is fairly toxic, but we use it in our pools, and it reacts with human, let me say, residues in the pool to produce volatile halomethanes that can be inhaled and they're carcinogenic. And so the question is this a problem? Well, it depends. And it depends is key to the risk assessment. For example, if which I'm not a great swimmer, but I love to take a dip in the pool, probably low risk. If you have an athlete who is training for the Olympics, who does many laps and is breathing in deeply, that's going to be more of a risk. So it really depends. By the way, the route of the exposure, the frequency and extent determines the hazard. Just a note on the Brookline pool, our pool is the first municipal pool in the country. And we have instituted about 20 years ago a technology taken from NASA, used by NASA, to reduce the amount of chlorine that would be used. And so our pool is actually one of the few in the country that has
Mr.
lower
Berger,
amounts.
this is all very interesting, but would you, do you have a question for one
Yeah,
of the petitioners?
the question is, the environmental risk assessment is not just listing the toxicity, but it's an analysis of the use and who's going to be using it and how frequently they'll be using it. So I support Article 23 so that a proper environmental risk assessment can be conducted on the artificial turf. Although climate change requires we use natural grass, as a former Park and Rec Commissioner, I know we have two camps, artificial, we have active and passive recreational use. The Hatchett-Kahn amendment to Article 24 is also an important amendment that should be voted. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jett?
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator, Julie Jetty, Precinct 16. I'm just wondering if anyone from the Park and Rec Department could talk about, how many of our fields are currently under consideration for conversion? Is there anything that's being considered to convert from grass to turf, other than the Driscoll Field, which sort of doesn't exist in its current form in any case? Thank you.
Ms. O'Connor?
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. At this time, there is nothing in the CIP for synthetic turf, but I would defer to Erin Schunk Galantine, who may be able to answer that more articulately than myself.
Ms. Galantine?
Erin Schunk Galantine, Commissioner of Public Works. There are no other fields currently contemplated for synthetic turf, but I do want to put the caveat out there that there's a athletic fields needs assessment and master plan that was completed and published in 2020. It's on the Parks and Open Space Division website that identified the need for additional athletic fields to meet current demand, and was looking at an increase of both natural grass fields and synthetic grass fields, not identified, but was looking at how to meet the demand. So while there's nothing currently planned and no fields identified, the plan itself identified a need and makes a recommendation for additional fields, both natural and synthetic.
Thank you, Mr. Kolthoff.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Gideon Kolthoff, Precinct 6, town meeting member. Just have a couple of brief questions that I hope someone over there can help with. First off, I was just looking at the planned layout for Driscoll School, and the new design looks like a Garden of Eden compared to what we have now. The significantly less asphalt, significantly less hard court. It really looks quite lovely. First off, I wanted to ask a question about something I'd heard earlier, that there was going to be no, in the current design, there's no actual grass at the school. Judging by these plans, that does not seem to be accurate, but I was hoping that someone could perhaps weigh in on that and tell me, is there actually grass here? I see things called gardens, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Secondly, what is the programming look like for that field, for what's currently planned as a synthetic field? Is that supposed to be, is that where kids are going to be running around just in recess? Will they have other places they can go? And lastly, when will this field be programmed during the summertime heavily like the other fields around Brookline, or is this primarily going to be used during the cooler seasons? I hate the idea of synthetic turf, although at the same time I do see the need for it potentially in an area like this. So I just want to hopefully maybe cut through some of the clutter and get some answers. Thank you.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff, can you respond to those questions?
Yes, thank you. Susan Wolf-Dickoff, former chair of the building committee, former school committee member. Good questions. One of the things that we had a very robust discussion about was what is the best natural sort of element and then best natural environment for that area and for the students there and for the neighbors. Grass, the way that it grows in Wellesley, is not
one of the best options for a densely populated North Brookline schoolyard that's literally used by hundreds and hundreds of people every single day, and closing it off to the extent that would be required, as Ms. Shute-Galentine said, as the commissioner said, is just not a realistic option to keep it in that pristine condition. So what we talked a lot about, we had wonderful parent input on and wonderful expert input on, was what are the different natural elements that we can have. There's a net increase to the number of trees, a pretty significant increase to the net number of trees on the property. There's a very significant increase to the net number, square footage of outdoor space for students by going up a story. We added to the usable open space pretty dramatically. There were other elements, things like rain gardens, things like vegetable gardens, many things, including native plants for pollinators, a wide variety of things. Others are more expert than I am, but basically the bottom line is that this whole idea of these lush grass things that people have in their mind is just not the right answer for that area. So it is a net increase in green open space, usable open space. It's a net increase in natural elements like trees, and it's an appropriate use. There is some grass there, but it's an appropriate use in a way that there will actually be grass, as opposed to sort of the conditions that we saw at the Florida Rough and Ridley. There may have been another question, Mr. Moderator, that I missed.
Well, Mr. Kolthoff also wanted to know what use would be made of the field during the summer.
Yes, so those are programmed. I would pass that back to the Commissioner Aaron Shute-Galentine or Principal Euclid, since they are the ones that are much more knowledgeable about the scheduling over the summer. We do have summer programs typically at the Driscoll School, but one of them might be able to give you a more specific answer.
Ms. Galentine?
Shute-Galentine, Commissioner of Public Works. I would say generally I would defer to recreation, but I did happen to take a look at this today. So the majority of the programming at the Driscoll School is the Driscoll School uses for school, for recess, for PE, after school programming, and youth soccer. Youth soccer is programmed for both the spring and fall seasons at the Driscoll School, and then camp is generally held or has been held at the Driscoll School, and the outdoor space is used for that. So the camp sometimes move from site to site, but that has generally been usage in the past.
Thank you. There's a motion for the question by Ms. Daly, seconded by Mr. Sandman. We've been at this for an hour and 3/4, and there are those of us who think that perhaps there's nothing further that could be said about all of these articles, but that's maybe an overstatement. In any case, I'm going to allow the motion for the question. It requires a 2/3 vote. All right. On the motion for the question, I have the following people signed up, and I'll do my best to describe what their position is. Signed up to speak: Mr. Golden for Article 23, Mr. Ananian for referral and amendment of Article 24, Mr. Feldberg for Article 24, Mr. Richmond, I'm not sure, Ms. Stahl against 23 and for 24, Ms. Cunningham, Deanne Cody, Louise Bowditch, Jesse Gray, Ms. Hahn, Mr. Hahn, and Mr. Ishak, Ms. Yu, all of whom are for Article 24. Mr. Homer in favor of 23, Mr. Sandman for 23 and against 24. Ms. Arkaya speaking on 24, and Ms. Fridland on 24. I have the following speakers in the queue, the chat monitor queue: Mr. Levy, Mr. Goodwin, Ms. Mr. Homer, Ms. Jonas, Mr. Day, and Ms. Gilman. Ms. Schweitzer, you have a point of order.
Thank you, Assistant Moderator Naomi Schweitzer, Precinct 10. My point of order question to you is, could you tell us on the speaker list how many of those speakers are residents that are not town meeting members and how many are Brookline High School students or high school students? Thank you.
No. I'm sorry, I have no way of really reliably making that analysis. They're all people who have been admitted to participation in our town meeting, and they're either town meeting members or voting residents, and a couple of them, at least one is a high school student, I believe. All right, on the motion to refer, I'm sorry, motion for the question, a yes vote will terminate debate and will proceed directly to vote on the various, on the two articles in the in a way that I'll describe. A no vote will put us back into the debate, and we'll continue to hear from speakers who have signed up and speakers in the queue. And I think we're ready for a yes. Okay, the voting period has commenced. Let's vote. Voting period is over. We have the vote, please.
81 no, 14 abstentions.
Motion fails by a vote of 157 in favor, 81 opposed, and 14 abstentions. I call on Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Jonathan Golden, Town Meeting Member Precinct 11, Driscoll parent and member of the Driscoll School Site Council, speaking for myself. I'm a high school teacher, and my students call me Dr. Golden. I am not a medical doctor, nor do I play one on TV. Since my PhD is in history, I will leave the scientific details of this debate to the experts, experts whom the town would consult with the passage of Warrant Article 23. Based on the multiple conversations that I've had about Warrant Article 23 and Warrant Article 24, I do not see the warrant article process to be the right process for deliberating the science and coming to scientific conclusions. Rather, a well-constructed panel can have an informed conversation to bring the community as close to consensus as possible. In the time of COVID, we have seen a model of such an expert scientific panel, Panel 4, that brought together expertise for thoughtful, informed decision-making based on science and the needs of students and teachers. An athletic field task force is not just about the science of turf. It is about preparing the community for all dimensions of all possible solutions. Those dimensions range from mental health to athletic needs to costs and resources to maintain each type of field. If the town were to say no to turf in any circumstance, it is saying yes to grass fields. While I appreciate the work done by the Parks Department and others to cost out possible scenarios for grass fields, possibly at Driscoll or elsewhere, those studies would likely need to be adjusted in the context of a comprehensive plan, not just a project-by-project approach to fields, as has happened in past debates and in the current one. In my estimation, it is essential to create an athletic field task force. In recent weeks, a majority of town meeting has consolidated around the idea of making community-wide plans when it comes to housing and development. So let's make a plan for the design of Brookline athletic fields that is carefully considered over a reasonable timetable of weeks, not a rush to judgment tonight. Let's come together for warrant Article 23, just as town meeting last night overwhelmingly supported the same approach for warrant Article 22. Please join me in voting for a robust scientific conversation, an informed conversation that our community needs and deserves when it comes to athletic fields in Brookline. Please vote favorable action for warrant Article 23, and let's make a plan together. Thank you.
Mr. Ananian?
Hello, Scott Ananian, town meeting member, precinct 10. So as a parent of kids at Driscoll, I'd like to remind people that we're not discussing artificial turf in isolation. Warrant Article 24 has a concrete and immediate effect on kids at Driscoll. The effects on all other fields in town and schools in town are delayed by years. Due to the construction of the new Driscoll School, where for logistic reasons, the new school building needed to be built on the playing field of the old Driscoll School, Driscoll kids have been without a playing field for 2 years already, more if you include time lost to COVID in spring of 2020. And under the current project plan, won't have a playing field, even in the best case, until sometime in 2024. The choice of artificial turf was driven not only by the high rate of playing field utilization and the experience at the new Ridley School, but also by the timeline implications. A natural grass surface needs time to grow and take root, and it could push off the playing field for kids at Driscoll another full growing season. Kids who entered kindergarten in fall of 2020 will be fourth graders in fall of 2025, never having had anything but a small blacktop area for recess and sports. Now, I'm not opposed to natural grass here, but I am troubled by a last-minute shift which impacts our kids without a proper plan. And to be clear, I've asked the petitioners for an Article 24 for a concrete plan since the original article was filed. If there are good ways to have high usage grass fields, what are they? What procedures are we going to institute? How much will they cost per year? And what staff will be responsible for the field? Can we speed up the installation and get our kids a playing field sooner by rolling out sod? Can we regularly replace a worn field with sod? How much does that cost? What are the operational budget implications every year? How many hours per year of usage are we going to aim for? If the result is less than the current 800 hours a year, what programs are we going to cancel or give up in order to preserve the grass? How will we preserve equity among programs at our different schools, especially if this moratorium affects other schools in the future? Pet urine can kill grass. How will this new field interact with our green dog program? Can we split the difference and roll down sod on half the field, even if we know it won't last under use, just to give our kids at Driscoll half a playing field they can use while the other half is seeded and grows? And how much would that cost? These details matter. There's a big difference to me as a Driscoll parent between a natural grass field that is closed 3 days a week, or a natural grass field that is closed 1 day a month, or a natural grass field that is replaced with new sod once a month. Now, maybe it is too much to ask petitioners to come up with a detailed plan by themselves, but I do hope that the warrant Article 23 committee and referral will be able to accomplish its task. If you believe a natural grass field is possible given the usage of Driscoll, I urge you to vote yes on the referral motion in order to give the proponents the best possible chance at putting together a comprehensive plan for the Driscoll field that would make me and other parents comfortable with the trade-offs being proposed. But if referral fails and I had to vote tonight, I would vote yes on the Hatchet Amendment to give all projects in town the benefit of proper time to properly plan for natural grass fields. The discussion will continue among Driscoll parents about what's best for Driscoll kids. But the Driscoll kids should not be pawns in this townwide debate. Thank you.
Wendy Stahl. S-T-A-H-L.
Hi, thank you. I'm Wendy Stahl. I am a member of the Zero Emissions Advisory Board. I'm a leader in Mothers Out Front. I am a medical doctor. I was a lifelong soccer player right up until the middle of my first pregnancy. And I am a very proud mother of 2 on playgrounds all the time. People are making it seem like a natural field prevents kids from playing. Have you seen kids recently? Do you remember being a kid? They play on anything. I've heard said tonight that there are no definitive studies about the dangers of artificial turf fields, but there are dozens of studies on the dangers of PFAS and microplastics, even if not about turf specifically. And we do know that PFAS can pass through the skin. If these studies are insufficient for everyone here tonight, then nothing will be. You will end up installing turf fields and using my children as test subjects. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting to get emotional. We pride ourselves in Brookline on how progressive we are. We're known around the entire state as the climate leaders here in Brookline. Our goal is net zero by 2040, not 2050 like the rest of the state. In order to be net zero with artificial turf, you have to plant 2 to 3 trees for every square meter of turf. That means more than 3,000 trees just for the small Driscoll field. Where are we going to find the money for that? Where are we going to find the space for that? Or was our commitment to net zero a joke? I sure hope it wasn't. I'm kind of counting on it, and so are my kids. With artificial turf, the choice is really easy. Don't put it in. Grass is net zero, even with all the mowing. If we use an organic lawn management program and avoid chemical fertilizers, it will even be carbon negative. That means the grass will help us get to net zero from all the other ways we make emissions. I'm on the town's Zero Emissions Advisory Board, and it's my job to help us get to net zero. Well, it's pretty clear what we need to do here. We've led the state on so many climate initiatives, but we're actually a bit behind on this one. A handful of municipalities already have put in 3-year moratoriums, and some have even had a chance to renew them. You've been told that a natural field cannot withstand more than 640 hours a year without falling into poor condition, but that is not true. There are multiple case studies in Massachusetts where fields are in good condition with over 1,000 hours of use. These fields are properly built and organically maintained. According to the DPW, we even have 4 fields in Brookline that get over 1,000 hours and are still in good condition. And Cypress, with its complete overhaul and new drainage system, is likely going to be way better than any field we've ever had. Also, didn't we have this discussion a few years ago already? I mean, truly, this is not a tough decision. It's time to stop building any more artificial turf fields in this progressive climate forward town. Vote yes on 24. Heck, vote yes on 23 too. It can't hurt. But just to be clear, the medical and scientific communities are unequivocal about this. PFAS is bad. Microplastics are bad. The greenhouse gas emissions are insanely bad. My goodness, we're a town full of doctors and scientists. We know how to read literature. How can we not follow the science in order to keep our kids safe and our planet from overheating? If you care about the climate, the choice is clear. Vote yes on 23, it can't hurt, but vote no on the referral of 24 to a subcommittee. Vote no on the Hatchet-Kahn amendment on 24 to exempt Driscoll. And above all else, vote yes on the main motion of 24. My children will thank you.
Mr. Levy?
Hi, I'm Mark Levy, county member from Precinct 7. And my question is, has anybody done a study, peer-reviewed study that shows what the quantitative risk is of having kids play on artificial turf? What's the lifetime risk? Because if these chemicals stay in the body, it's not just this year or next year or the year after they graduate from public schools. It's their lifetime that could have a higher risk. So that's the question. Anybody who's familiar with the literature in the area, can you answer that question? Because I think that's the key question on this matter.
Well, Mr. Toffel, what do you know about that?
Let me see if I understand your question, Mark. Your question is, have there been studies that have assessed the long-term health risks of people playing on fields due to PFAS risk? I think that's your question.
Yep.
None that I'm aware of. And moreover, remember that study I showed you, which suggests to my untrained eye that PFAS may not actually even be in the product we're talking about, as I noted in my conversation. So it depends on, as Michael Berger mentioned, what the level of hazardousness is and what the risk exposures are. And that's exactly what this 23 is meant to create, a task force of experts to review that literature in time for town meeting to review it and change course if they wanted to. So Mark, I really hope if there is an answer, that an expert on the panel will be able to provide it in their report so that we could all benefit from that very important question.
Mr. Spritz?
I think
You have a
I've
point
got
of order?
a comment to make first, if you
Okay.
don't mind, sir. As I said, I think that's the key question. And absence of evidence.
Well, Mr.
No.
Levy, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you because somebody has a point of order and points of order interrupt the speaker. We'll get back to you, I'm sure. Mr. Spritz?
Yeah, Mr. Moderator, I have a question. I believe that I have a point of order. I believe that our rules require speakers to proceed in the order of town meeting members before residents. And your speaking order has thus far not followed that precisely. And I wanted to ask why, or if we could have a ruling to reorder the speakers according to the town meeting member guidelines.
Well, you're wrong, Mr. Spritz. There's
Okay.
not an ironclad rule. It's one of the guidelines that govern how we order the list the speaker's orders. It's up to the moderator to do this, and the moderator is guided by that concept and that general proposition, as well as a number of others. Mr. Levy?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me simply say that if there's no studies about this type of field, and nobody has done a really thorough risk assessment, which it sounds like it may be the fact, about what it's like to play in those fields and what the risk is lifetime, I can't support any installation of grass fields at this point. And I also don't see how in a matter of weeks, Brookline can come up with its own study about what the risk is. So my inclination is to vote yes on 24. And I may vote yes on 23 as well, but I don't expect it to be able to resolve the question. Certainly the environment issue is clear cut against the fields, the artificial turf. But the health risk is the major thing. And I think I need to vote until I'm shown it's safe. I can't vote for any environmental, any artificial turf. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Richmond would like to respond to your comment. Mr. Richmond?
Thank you very much,
petitioner of 23.
Mr. Assistant
24.
Moderator, Clint Richmond, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6, and co-petitioner of Warrant Article 24. I'd like to respond to Mr. Levy's question. I'm a little disappointed in some of the answers I'm hearing to his question. We know that on Downs Field, PFBA was detected at 3.5 parts per million. That's been a known fact since the Department of Public Works received a report, an independent lab report from the manufacturer. The report on Driscoll, I have responded to Mr. Toffel's questions and sent it to a long list of people at Town Hall, explaining why that is a flawed report. That's no proof at all that that field is free of PFAS. Warrant Article 24, in consultation with scientists, has been developed a rubric for analyzing, certifying that fields are free of PFAS, and the gold standard is total organic fluorine. And that test has not been performed on the Driscoll, which is the same as the Ridley turf. So, and to answer the rest of Mr. Levy's question, the exposure of a forever chemical is not just to the immediate users, although that's something to be alarmed about, along with the other chemicals that they'd be exposed to that have been mentioned, but we need to take responsibility for the consumption of the products we buy, and the turf fields are manufactured primarily in Dalton, Georgia, a poor majority Latinx community in Georgia. And they are already suffering from PFAS contamination, and their drinking water, I don't even know if they're testing in Georgia because they're not as advanced as Massachusetts when it comes to PFAS regulation at the state level. So, and likewise, we need to take responsibility for the plastic that we're consuming. You know, we're talking about several dozen tons of plastic for a turf field. So, you know, that's taking responsibility for the extraction of fossil fuels, for the manufacture of many different types of plastics, including polyurethane, which is a benzene-based plastic. You know, these are facts that have been known for a long time, and I don't think we should keep shutting our eyes to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin.
Hi, thank you, Carolyn Carolyn Goodwin, she, her, precinct 8. I'm new to the turf discussion, so I had a question probably for the town itself. But absent a moratorium, is there a process? I don't need to know the details of the process, but just wanted to know if there is one for other fields such as like the the baseball field at Amory Park being converted to turf.
Ms. Galantine.
Karen Chief Galantine, Commissioner of Public Works. There are no plans to convert other fields such as Amory to synthetic turf right now, if that is your question. But if the question is around process as it relates to park design or field design, the Park and Recreation has a prescribed design review committee that they establish whenever they do any major capital renovation of a park. So any renovation of a field or playground, et cetera, in the future would involve a public process, whatever was included in that project.
Thank you. If anyone wishes to make a motion for the question, I will allow it. Well, you've had your moment of okay. Say it again. Mr. Sandman moves the question and Mr. Kolthoff seconds. Same rules, 2/3 vote required. Yes vote, an affirmative vote on this motion will terminate debate. A no vote will cause us to go back to the speakers lists and sign up lists. I think we're ready for a vote. 2/3 vote required. And the vote, please.
196 yes, 42 no, 16 abstentions.
Motion carries by a vote of 196 in favor, 42 opposed, and 16 abstentions. We first take up Article 23. The only motion before you is the motion on the gray supplement number 1, pages 1 to 3. Mr. Toffel's motion. A yes vote will approve the creation of the study committee that the motion calls for. A no vote will defeat the motion. And I think we're ready for a vote. Yep. Yes. Voting period is commenced. And vote.
210 yes, 33 no, 9 abstentions.
Motion carries by a vote of 210 in favor, 33 opposed, and 9 abstentions. I've been taken to task for not having read once again the list of those signed up to speak when we dealt with the second motion for the question. Well, I already did that for the first one, and I hoped that that would be sufficient. Move to Article 24. The main motion, again, is on page 24-4 over to 24-5. That a bylaw that would impose a moratorium on artificial turf surfaces. There is an amendment on the yellow supplement, that the Khan amendment that you've heard described, that would exempt the Driscoll School field from that moratorium. And finally, or first, a motion to refer, which is on supplement number 4, page 1, to refer the subject matter to the Athletic Surface Task Force appointed by the Select Board under warrant Article 23 that we just passed. So we first deal with a motion to refer. If that passes, we move on to the next article. If it fails, we vote then on the Khan Hatchett amendment to exempt Driscoll, and then we vote on the main motion either as amended or not, depending upon how the amendment vote went. So motion to refer, an affirmative vote would terminate the proceedings under Article 24 and refer the subject matter to the Select Board committee appointed by the Select Board. And we're ready for that motion. Voting period has commenced. Voting is over. May I have the count, please?
146 yes, 95 no, 9 abstentions.
The motion to refer carries by a vote of 146 in favor, 95 opposed, and 9 abstentions. We now turn to Article 9. And we're into non-controversial terrain for a while. You'll be, I think, relieved to know. The motion under Article 9 is on the bottom of page 9-8. It's moved by Mr. Doughty and seconded by Ms. Ashkenazi concerning the town's living wage bylaw. Mr. Bors. Harry, yes. Mr. Bors, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was remuted. I will start again. Harry Bors, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3, speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee. There's a state minimum wage, a Brookline minimum wage, and a Brookline living wage. They are 3 different things. This article seeks to adjust the calculation of the Brookline living wage bylaw to better reflect its original intent. We did this a number of years ago. Article 4.8 was originally established to create a Brookline living wage and a Brookline minimum wage. At the time, the state minimum wage was what could be termed at best miserly. The Brookline minimum is calculated by adding $1 to the Massachusetts minimum wage. At the time of passage, it was anticipated that the calculated Brookline living wage would be higher than the Brookline minimum wage. Our living wage is calculated in addition to the minimum wage on other town wages that result from collective bargaining agreements. The Brookline minimum and living wages apply to part-time and temporary employees outside of the collective bargaining groups. So this adjusted wage level separation may be about to change or flip because Brookline pegs its minimum wage to that of the state, and the state minimum has been rising. Meaning if we leave Article 4.8 unchanged, it may result in a situation where the adjusted Brookline living wage will fall below our minimum wage. This amendment will clarify and modify the calculation of the Brookline living wage and align the bylaw with the original intent of Article 4.8, which was to have the living wage higher than the minimum wage and create an intentional stratification. The minimum wage may apply to certain seasonal or entry-level positions, as opposed to the somewhat higher living wage that can apply to employees with more experience or with oversight responsibility. The example given being, say, junior lifeguard versus senior lifeguard. Importantly, this applies not merely to the town of Brookline, but also those having contracts for goods or services with the town of Brookline for more than $5,000. Making this change will ensure, regardless of the temporal fluctuations in the economy or the hiring market, that Brookline's living wage will always be at least $1 more than its minimum wage. By a vote of 20-2 with 2 abstentions, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on this article as amended, and that amendment really we just clarified that the minimum wage in the article is to read Brookline minimum wage for distinction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ashkenazi.
Thank you. I'm going to keep it short and sweet, just like me. Miriam Ashkenazi speaking on behalf of the Select Board. I can't do better than what Harry just did. Thank you, Harry. You basically cut out half my remarks explaining everything. So just briefly, as Harry said, warrant Article 9 is a proposal to change the town living wage bylaw to ensure that the Brookline living wage does not fall below the minimum wage. This change, as proposed by the HR director and supported by the Select Board, speaks to the original intent of the Brookline living wage bylaw. Brookline should support a living wage, not just a minimum wage. The Select Board voted unanimously for favorable action for this bylaw change to adjust the living wage to be $1 more than the minimum wage.
Thank you, Mr. Leibovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Alec Lebovitz, Precinct 8. I'll also keep my remarks short, as I think Mr. Bors did a great job at encapsulating a lot of the issues here. I risk just speaking strong support of this warrant article. As we all know, inflation has exceeded 8% in the past year. exacerbating an already affordability crisis that had gripped our town, driven in part by rising housing, healthcare costs, and the cost of general goods. I think it's incumbent on us as a town to use every lever we can to help those who work and live in the town to weather this affordability crisis. And this bylaw would do just that. So I strongly advise my fellow town meeting members to support introducing this mechanism to ensure that we are paying a true living wage as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. On the, I've been asked to be more clear in my explanation of what you're voting on. So I will try to do that, but I don't know how I could have been much clearer. But in any case, the motion you're now about to vote on is on page 9-8, and it would add to the living wage bylaw the underlined material on page 9-9, which you've heard described by Mr. Bors. A yes vote will amend the bylaw in that fashion. The no vote will retain the bylaw as it is. We're ready for main motion, Article 9. Voting period is commenced. Majority vote. Now the vote, please.
238 yes, 3 no, 4 abstentions.
Motion carries by a vote of 238 in favor, 3 opposed, and 4 abstentions. A couple of, one town meeting member has claimed to have been confused by our referral vote under Article 24. Again, I don't know how I could have been much clearer. We voted on the main motion on Article 23, that passed. We then turned to Article 24. I explained that there was a main motion, an amendment, and a referral motion. I explained that the referral motion would refer the subject matter of Article 24 to the committee appointed pursuant to the motion passed under Article 23, and that motion carried. End of story. Article 10. Motion under Article 10 is on page 10-4, moved by Mr. Selwyn, seconded by Mr. Green, to transfer a sum of money from a special appropriation to support the comprehensive planning efforts described by Article 26 of the November 2021 special town meeting. Mr. Wyszynski.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Neil Wyszynski, Precinct 5. Shaping development for equity and resiliency is one of the most powerful roles of municipal government. But without comprehensive planning and responsive zoning, our development decisions are based on special approvals and exceptions after a complex and opaque public process. Not only do we fall short in transparency and accountability, but we're missing out on the potential to harness development to address our growing crises of unaffordability, climate vulnerability, inequity, and traffic. I didn't write this. This is from Michelle Wu's campaign website, but it sure sounds like Brookline. And this is the thinking behind Article 10 and the comprehensive planning resolution passed with overwhelming support last November as Article 26. Last November's resolution called for the start of planning for a comprehensive planning process with an ultimate goal of zoning reform. Article 10, which is before us now, reallocates funds remaining after a zoning rewrite process which was abandoned. to begin planning for a real comprehensive planning process. This is a down payment, perhaps enough to start planning the full project scope, do some background studies, GIS updates, and data analysis to better understand our existing environment. And as we stated last fall, life will continue to happen while we plan. We'll continue the housing production plan, we'll continue corridor studies such as Lower Boylston, and we'll continue responding to opportunities such as 10 Brookline Place. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. That said, we must recognize that our planning staff is under-resourced, and I'm glad that the budget we just passed adds a planner to that department. I'll end with some more thoughts from Michelle Wu's campaign website. Again, she wrote about Boston, so I removed the Boston-specific references. I quote, "Our zoning code hasn't been comprehensively updated for many decades, perhaps since the 1960s, and the existing complicated process disproportionately benefits the wealthy and well-connected with the resources to pursue zoning exceptions and waivers. The zoning process must be made more transparent, accountable, and equitable in order to bring private development into alignment with community needs for stable housing, safe streets, open space, reliable transportation, food access, and a healthy environment." Again, it sure sounds like what we need in Brookline. So let's make a plan. I urge favorable action on the advisory committee motion.
Thank you, Mr. Selwyn.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're fine.
Thank you.
Speak.
Lee Selwyn, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13, speaking for a unanimous advisory committee. In 2018, the Department of Planning and Community Relations asked for a CIP allocation of $200,000, which was intended to fund a comprehensive restructuring of our zoning bylaw. That activity never happened, and less than $6,000 of the $200,000 had been spent by the beginning of this year. At the same time, back in November of last year, November 21, town meeting passed by a vote of 219-2 warrant article 26, which called for the creation of an inclusive, community-driven, comprehensive planning effort to understand our built environment and develop a long-term plan for land use and construction of housing and other facilities in the town. In that resolution, town meeting asked the select board to allocate funds for this effort, and that never happened. So warrant article 10 was submitted by the petitioners specifically for the purpose of proposing that the remaining funds from that 2018 allocation be transferred for this purpose. We were advised by the current director of the planning department that another roughly $6,000 was in the process of being spent on some additional work to make the zoning bylaw available on the town website, but that roughly $188,000 and some change was still available. So we advisory committee amended the warrant article as submitted to propose that $188,644 be transferred from the original purpose, the original planning department allocation for the zoning restructuring to this effort. And by a vote of 20-0 with no abstentions, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on this warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Gatsby. Bernard Green, speaking on behalf of the Select Board. And I apologize in advance to the extent that my comments are redundant to a couple of the things that Mr. Selwyn has already stated. So let me begin. Warrant Article 10 is intended to kickstart a planning process that town meeting voted in the fall of 2021 with then Warrant Article 26, which was a resolution urging the town to begin a project of comprehensive planning and zoning reform to address more effectively emerging 21st century issues and to fund the engagement of necessary consultants and the hiring of planning department staff to accomplish that goal. The town was still struggling with the impact on its finances of COVID and the resulting lockdown, and many hands that were out asking for pieces of our limited resources. Thus, the requested planning and zoning reform project did not get off the ground, nor did funding for this project appear in the town administrator's fiscal year 2023 budget. But the petitioners of Warrant Article 26, being industrious, worked with the planning department to find money. As Mr. Selwyn noted, a 2018 appropriation of $200,000 to the planning department was found, and Warrant Article 10 was submitted to allow the transfer of the remaining balance from those funds to the planning and zoning project. In addition, the advisory committee amended the town administrator's fiscal year 23 budget to add money for an additional planning staff member. Once Warrant Article 10 passes, the lobbying will begin. Factions in town will argue that their priorities and values must be centered in any planning process. But as we saw in the debate on Skyline Park's athletic fields and the debate on artificial turf versus grass, none of this is simple, and many important but conflicting interests will have to be balanced. So I say two things are most important, and this is my opinion. First, people must be open-minded, including having a willingness to compromise. Even issues like climate and equity, for example, have no easy, prefabricated solutions, but are complex problems. They must be addressed by people who do not claim omniscience, but are willing to listen, to learn, as well as to teach. Second, Brookline's future must include a middle class, which means that we must protect those old buildings that house homeowners and renters who are struggling in the middle class and do not want their homes bulldozed for a luxury building that may include a few affordable units, but which drive rents up around them. That is one of the many risks we face in the Brookline housing market that we must acknowledge and address in this comprehensive planning project. In conclusion, the Select Board on April 19 urges favorable, in a vote on April 19, urges favorable action on Warrant Article 10 by a vote of 4-0 with one member absent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman.
Hi, sorry. Amanda Zimmerman, town meeting member, Precinct 7. Let me start by saying that I think visioning for our future is a great idea, and I hope the backers of this warrant article, last year's warrant article 26, and the select board nominating this committee welcome proponents of more density and the urgent alleviation of our housing shortage into this visioning. While I supported warrant article 26 last year in its final compromised form, and support the current warrant article 10 to provide necessary funding, it is important to note, as many did last fall, that doing comprehensive planning cannot be allowed to interfere with the critical implementation of the planning the town is already engaged in. I particularly want to highlight the housing production plan, which is now well underway with some of the most inclusive community engagement our town has seen, including from many people who were previously unknown to our boards and committees, and with recommendations expected by fall 2022. I expect this will also include recommendations on how Brookline will comply with the MBTA Communities Act, which is state law, to provide additional capacity for significantly more homes in Brookline near transit. Moreover, there is ongoing much needed planning to address climate sustainability, as many of the supporters of warrant article 24 just highlighted. all three of these cannot be allowed to wait 3 to 5 years or even longer that it might take to complete a comprehensive plan. We need to continue and strengthen current planning efforts to address critical issues like housing affordability and climate change, and to implement those plans while at the same time planning comprehensively for Brookline's longer-term future. In conclusion, I urge you to vote favorable action on this warrant article, but to make sure that this planning does not delay addressing our urgent needs and recommendations from ongoing, albeit more targeted planning efforts. Thank you.
Mr. Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Doggett, Precinct 13. Our town needs a comprehensive plan to address long-term growth, supporting infrastructure, and to balance the often competing needs of housing, open space, history, arts and culture, and commercial space, as well as considering the need to incorporate greater resiliency to accommodate climate change. The last comprehensive plan for Brookline was completed in 2005. Yep, that's over 17 years ago. Other neighboring cities and towns, such as Newton, Medford, Boston, have begun or recently completed their comprehensive plans for the next 10 years. Somerville has completed 2, yep, that's 2 comprehensive plans in this time frame. I think we can all agree that much has changed since 2007. To face the challenges of long-term growth in the town, we need to put the effort into taking the longer view and plan for our future. Last November, Town meeting recognized this need and in Warrant Article 26 urged the Select Board in an almost unanimous vote to form a committee to plan the scope and requirements for such an undertaking. However, Warrant Article 26 was a resolution and did not have any funding appropriated. Warrant Article 10 remedies that situation. In 2018, Town meeting appropriated $200,000 for the Planning Department to fund a zoning reorganization project that was subsequently discontinued by the department, leaving a significant unspent balance in the account. Warrant Article 10 asks that town meeting retarget this zoning reorganization appropriation so that it can be used by the planning department as a down payment on the comprehensive townwide planning effort. It's important to note that there is absolutely no impact at all on the FY23 budget, since these funds have already been appropriated at a previous town meeting. With these funds, the Select Board Committee will have the resources to initiate the comprehensive planning process. Please vote favorable action on Warrant Article 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Gina Hahn, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. I'll be brief. As you've heard tonight, Warrant Article 10 will allow us to move forward together intentionally to plan for a more socially just, environmentally sustainable, and economically vibrant Brookline. By using these unspent planning department funds to develop a work program, budget, and scope for an inclusive community-driven planning and zoning reform process, we'll be on our way to realizing Warrant Article 26, which town meeting voted almost unanimously for last fall. Warrant Article 26 laid the groundwork for making a plan.
No.
Warrant Article 10 gets us started down that road. If we want to increase equity in Brookline, then we need a plan. If we want to maximize affordable housing in Brookline, then we need to plan for this. And if we want to realize the important goal of zero emissions community-wide by 2040, then we need to make that part of our plan. Accessibility, resiliency, increased commercial development, and economic vitality. These are all things we need to be deliberate about creating, and the best way to do that is to plan. So let's move forward together. Let's not waste any more time getting started. I encourage you to vote favorable action on Warrant Article 10. Thank you.
Ms. Thal moves the question, and that's seconded by Ms. Hillman. I have Mr. Birnbaum with comment, Mr. Ananian with a question. Nobody else signed up for or against this article. This is Article 10, motion for the question. A yes vote will terminate debate, and a no vote will continue with Mr. Birnbaum and Mr. Ananian, and it takes a 2/3 vote, so we're ready. Commenced. Ready. Motion to terminate debate carries by a vote of 187 in favor, 54 opposed, and 3 abstentions. The motion we're voting on is on page 10-4 to transfer $188,000 for the comprehensive planning efforts. A yes vote will authorize that transfer. A no vote will not fund this activity. We're ready for a vote. Voting period is over. 243 yes, 2 no, 3 abstentions. Motion carries by a vote of 243 in favor, 2 opposed, and 3 abstentions. Call to your attention, that's 248 town meeting members voting out of 263. So we're well over 95%. Congratulations to all. Article 11. Motion under Article 11 is on page 11-3 that the town accept the provisions of a Mass General Law which concerning cost of living increases. Moved by Mr. Doggett, seconded by Mr. Green. Mr. Friedman. Harry Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Harry Friedman, Precinct 12, speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee. Town employees receive a salary or hourly wage while employed. Both the employee and the town contribute to a pension system that provides a defined benefit pension, that is a monthly payout for town retirees. Unless they have also worked in the private sector, town employees are not eligible for Social Security. Those of us who are eligible for Social Security are entitled in most years to a cost of living adjustment, or COLA. This adjustment is calculated on the entire amount of the Social Security benefit. For example, if Social Security provided a 1% COLA and the recipient's old benefit was $2,000 a month, the new benefit would be 1% more, or $2,020. Town COLAs work differently. The cost of living increase is not calculated on the entire benefit. It is only calculated on a portion of the benefit if the annual pension benefit is $13,000 or higher. For example, if the COLA is 3%, the maximum the state allows, and the retiree has an annual benefit of $10,000, the increase is 3% of $10,000 or $300. If the retiree has an annual benefit of $13,000 and the COLA is 3%, the increase is $390. However, that $390 is the current cap. Even if a retiree has a pension of $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 a year, with a 3% COLA, the annual benefit increase is capped at $390 because we can only look at the first $13,000 of pension benefits on which to calculate the COLA. Warrant Article 11 seeks to raise the $13,000 to $15,000. With a pension benefit of $15,000 or less, the retiree's COLA would be 3% of their actual pension benefit. However, with a pension benefit of $15,000 or more, no one would receive a COLA of more than 3% of $15,000 or $450. Warrant Article 11 only affects retirees with annual pensions of $13,000 or more. Those retirees affected would see their 3% COLAs increase from $390 per year to $450 per year. This is an annual increase of $60 or $5 per month. It is enough to purchase approximately 1 cup of coffee per month. The annual cost for about 850 retirees is estimated by the Retirement Board at $49,000. Brookline needs to fully fund its pension liability by 2030. We are well on the way of doing so. It is estimated that this increase would add about $100,000 per year to the existing funding schedule. However, due to positive investment returns, the Retirement Board thinks they can continue to substantially fund the future pension obligations without changing the annual payment schedule. The advisory committee unanimously recommends favorable action on the motion offered under Warrant Article 11. Thank you.
Mr. Van Scoyac.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. I'm John Van Scoik from the Select Board, and I'm eternally grateful for our town employees who work hard for us every day. And yet, here I stand asking you to vote no on Article 11, which proposes a $60 increase in the annual cost of living payments to retirees. And let me specify that I am a minority of one on the Select Board in taking this position. The problem with Article 11 is a story that goes back to the 1930s. It goes something like this. There was a time when municipalities, including Brookline, granted pensions without regard for whether deductions from paychecks would be sufficient to pay for them. This pay-as-you-go system was in effect from 1939 to 1987, nearly 5 decades. During that time, cities and towns offered promises to cover pension fund deficits with revenues from their annual budgets. Well, you can guess what happened. The temptation to promise ever larger pension benefits was inescapable. Fiscal discipline took a holiday. The situation eventually became a crisis of unfunded pension liabilities, growing larger every year in city after city, town after town. Eventually, the threat of municipal defaults loomed, and the state, hardly a paragon of virtue when it comes to funding pensions, stepped in to order cities and towns to fund the promised pensions in full. Brookline has had to dig deep to make good on unfunded pensions by the year 2030 under these orders from the state. And this remains a $200 million plus problem with just a few years left to wipe the slate clean. So here we are facing fiscal year 23. What was 5.7% of the budget in 2006 and 7.7% of the budget in 2016 is now 8% of the budget and still growing. The town is committed to increasing pension contributions by 7.5% annually through 2030. The picture I'm painting is simple. Year after year, unfunded pension liabilities have grown as a problem for our budget, consuming a 50% larger share today than in 2006. And here's the thing, that minuscule bonus of $60 per year per retiree under Article 11 will add another $5 million to our pension obligations. That's not my number, that's the calculation of the retirement board, $5 million. All of a sudden, that $60 benefit increase doesn't seem so small. A simple rule of paying off your debts is this: to get out of a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. Article 11 digs us deeper into pension debt, $5 million deeper. To be precise, $4.9 million deeper, with no guarantee of escaping the consequences other than wishful thinking about stock market returns. The same stock market that has declined between 10 and 20% since January 1st. As a result of pension debt and other red ink accounts that consume collectively over 30% of our budgets, we've had to put the squeeze on schools, public safety, libraries, streets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other evening, we struggled just to come up with a few dollars for sidewalk repairs. It's time to stop digging. I'm finishing, thank you very much. It's time to stop digging a deeper hole. The only certain way to avoid adding another $4.9 million to our pension debt is to vote no on warrant Article 11. Please say no to more debt by voting no on Article 11.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Assistant Moderator Gatsby. Bernard Green, speaking on behalf of the Select Board. So Mr. Friedman, speaking for the Advisory Committee, provided much of the essential background for this warrant article. So again, there may be some redundancy in my remarks. So warrant Article 11 is submitted by the Retirement Board pursuant to their vote on March 7 to increase the base upon which an adjustment to a retiree's benefit is calculated. The increase will be to $15,000, meaning a base of $15,000, and the adjustment will be 3%. The additional benefit from this increase will give retirees an extra $60 per year or a cup of coffee per month at $5. Although it is important and helpful for retirees, this is not a big boost from their standpoint. It will not significantly impact the unfunded liability of the pension trust over the long-term horizon of pension investments. So 6 months of investment declines really is kind of irrelevant with respect to the time frame within which you look at pension investments. It will cost the town an approximately $49,000 annually for retirement benefits for 850 retired town employees who are collecting pensions. This additional $49,000 will be included in the budget. The Retirement Board believes that the time is right to make this adjustment because of the strong performance in their most recent actuarial valuation that will allow for this change without altering the funding schedule, which again is based on a long-term investment horizon. Some members of the Select Board expressed skepticism about the performance of the fund in the future, concerns about the annual increases in the pension cost, and the pressure the 7.5% annual escalation places on the town's overall finances. However, a majority of the Select Board believes that given the current inflationary environment faced by retirees and the needs of our retirees, then an adjustment to the base is reasonable and that the cost is appropriately absorbed by the town. And this is not a huge boost to retirees' income. If I may offer a few things to consider. This is not a COLA. It's called a COLA, it's not a COLA. It does not adjust their cost of living but adjust an arbitrary base amount. Unlike Social Security and many other public retirement plans, including state requirement plans that give COLAs on the full amount of the retirement, in Massachusetts, the adjustment is limited unless your retirement is equal to the base. Also, Brookline retirement system is a contributory system. All Brookline employees have 11% of their gross pay deducted and contributed to the systems. Pensions are particularly important to public employees in Massachusetts since the state does not pay into the Social Security system. Therefore, state pensions often make up a larger portion of retirees' overall income. And by the way, not all states fail to contribute to their Social Security system. So finally, 64 out of 104 Massachusetts retirement systems now have a base greater than $13,000. The Select Board voted favorable action on the motion offered by the Advisory Committee by a vote of 3-2 to increase the base amount on which the additional 3% will be calculated. Thank you.
Mr. Leibovitz?
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Alec Lebovitz, Precinct 8. I wanted to also speak in strong support of Article 11. This is another lever by which the town can help many of its residents, in this case, particularly vulnerable residents in the form of retired seniors, weather the current inflation and affordability crisis. Like we heard from Mr. Green, the majority of Massachusetts retirement systems have increased their COLA base beyond ours. And the majority of our retired municipal employees, who I might add dedicated their entire careers to admirable service to our town, do not collect Social Security, meaning that we, in essence, as a town, are their only true financial lifeline in many instances. I understand that we are under some severe fiscal constraints going forward, but as a values judgment, I don't think it's right that we balance our budget on the backs of municipal employees who dedicated their entire careers to civil service here in Brookline. So I urge my fellow town meeting members to strongly support this modest financial assistance to our retired employees. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one correction on something Mr. Van Scoyac said. He is not the only member of the Select Board who voted against this. Mr. Sandman did as well. Mr. Hebert?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Hebert, TMM Precinct 7. I originally was scheduled to speak against Article 11. And for many of the reasons that Mr. Van Scoyac had noted, I was very concerned in reading the combined reports about the deficit in the pension system, the deficit in the OPEB portion, and the number of times that I read in the combined reports of the word unsustainable in terms of finances. However, digging a little deeper into this article, I had occasion today to actually call the director of the retirement board and asked him to provide as current information as he possibly could, which he did. Mr. Frank Zecca sent the most recent report that is available from the actuarial firm that keeps an eye on our pension system. And the figure that's in the combined report of $225 million deficit as of the end of last year is actually a $169.7 million deficit. So we've actually we've actually made up $55 million over the past 2 years since that data. Well, the 2020 data is old data. We're $55 million better than that at this point in terms of unfunded liability. So we're way ahead of where we would have been. I received, like everybody else did probably, the letter from the Firefighters Association, which talked about, we used some somewhat incredible figures, it seemed, of having a 9% average gain investment return over the past 37 years. That actually is true. The investment firm that, or the firm that handles the investments in 2020, for example, which is a terrible year initially, the fund was down 19% annually, but it ended up 2020 up 38%. This year, when the market dropped 15 to 20%, through the end of April this year, our pension fund, or the investment in it, had dropped only 5.8%. So the management of the fund is impressive. I was told they have $58 million in reserve, and we're actually running much better than I thought we were. So I will be voting yes on Article 11. Thank you.
Ms. Pelkey?
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Linda Olson Pelkey, Precinct 17, Town Meeting Member. I just wanted to thank Mr. Hebert for giving us even more information, but to kind of try to frame our thinking about this based really on what I learned in my efforts to understand the true impacts of this warrant article to our future finances. And that is that each year, our very competent retirement board reviews an actuary table that is created by an outside consultant. And there are lots of different inputs that go into that. And if you go past into the history of these reports, you'll see that they fluctuate wildly because of differences in the inputs. And what wasn't mentioned, besides the good market returns that we have gotten in the past, is that their rosy picture that they're painting right at the moment was also based on the fact that more retirees than expected passed away. Well, we had a pandemic. We're in a pandemic. It's also true that they said, well, it's coming out really well because we haven't given raises during the pandemic. We gave very modest raises. Well, we all have heard how we need to pay our employees more to retain our professional staff. So I don't think we can base our judgment on the future being as rosy as we think it might be right now. And I actually happen to agree with Select Board members Sandman and Van Scoyac on this, because it is not a significant change for our retirees, but it is a significant additional cost, $5 million to our future liability. I'm not sure town meeting understands that we are obliged to pay future funding for all of our retirement obligations by 2030. And if you look at the schedule of payments that our retirement board tells us we have to be making, they are continually rising. And for this fiscal year, it was $31 million. And by 2030, in a past actuarial table, it was $55 million for 2030. So I just caution you to consider carefully that we're not sure how much we're going to owe by 2030, and that all of these inputs are changeable and very impactful to this future funding liability. Thank you.
I have a motion for the question, which I will allow. Is there a second? Ms. Lula. Ms. Lula moves and her motion has been seconded. If you close off debate, which is what motion for the question is all about, Ms. Daly will not have an opportunity to question the petitioner, and Mr. Ananian will not have an opportunity to comment. So with that in mind, it requires a 2/3 vote. We're ready for a vote. This is on motion to close debate. Count, please. Motion carries by a vote of 157 in favor, 62 opposed, and 15 abstentions. On the motion, main motion, Article 11, on page 11-3, a yes vote will increase the retirement allowance, et cetera, from 13 to 15,000. No vote will keep it at 13,000. We're ready for a vote. Vote, please. Motion carries by a vote of 182 in favor, 40 opposed, and 23 abstentions. We've disposed of Article 12 and 13 last night, so we move to Article 14. The motion for Article 14 is found at the very bottom of the Lavender Supplement number 1 to amend the zoning bylaw concerning special permit conditions, goes over to the top on page 2 of the Lavender Supplement number 1. It's moved by Mr. Van Skyok, seconded by Mr. Rodreo. This requires a 2/3 vote. Mr. Van Skyok.
Yes, I'm going to be very brief. And I would like to refer people to what is on page 1 of the Article 14 supplement number 1, pointing out that on May 17th, the select board reconsidered their vote under Article 14, took up an amendment which is described and I trust will be explained by the advisory committee presenter And it gives authorization to the zoning board of appeals to write the condition, which is the focus of this warrant article, into the zoning bylaw, and provides for the following motion that, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's got a lot of strikeouts and substitutions, but there be during construction projects, a third-party construction liaison directed by the building commissioner and paid for by the applicant, whose role will include, but not be limited to, on-site presence in support of the town's enforcement agencies at a frequency recommended by the building commissioner, referring complaints to the appropriate department, tracking resolution of such complaints as a public record, and convening monthly meetings with neighbors to hear feedback and/or concerns with the project and update them of upcoming work. In addition, the construction liaison will identify a community liaison within 30 days of when a construction activity is to commence, to whom they will provide twice monthly project status updates and look-aheads regarding construction activities. The community liaison shall be a town meeting member in the impacted precinct and/or resident living within a quarter-mile radius of the project. And then the vote was taken by the select board in favor of that above language. As I say, it will hopefully provide in the future for, under our zoning bylaw, there to be supervision, better and more frequent supervision of ongoing construction projects with neighborhood input to prevent situations developing where construction projects themselves have harmful impacts on neighborhoods.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgerail. RID.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Good evening. Carlos Ridrejo, Precinct 14, speaking for a unanimous advisory committee. Warrant Article 14 is submitted by the Department of Planning and Community Development and addresses the impact large construction projects have had on surrounding neighborhoods. Over the past years, Brookline has been the host of several large building projects throughout the town, including office and hotel space on Gateway East and residential projects within the Hancock Village. Not all projects have had a smooth relationship with its neighborhoods. With several large projects scheduled to begin soon, the planning department felt it needed to address this neighborhood impact issue. These large projects or major impact projects typically include the review by multiple departments in town. This includes reviewing blasting permits, truck routes, road infestation mitigation, and potential damage to underground utilities. Monitoring these impacts on the immediate neighborhoods are very taxing on the already busy department staff. Following the model of the town's municipal projects, such as park or school renovations, in which there is a built-in neighborhood outreach and mitigation plan, the planning department is proposing this zoning bylaw amendment, which would expressly empower the zoning board of appeals to require the project owner to have a detailed construction mitigation plan. This would include frequent communications with abutters, a project website with relevant construction information, on-site information signage, and most importantly, the ability to hire a third-party construction liaison to provide additional oversight and collect public feedback during the construction period. This consultant would refer any public complaints to the appropriate town department and track the resolution of such complaints. The advisory committee and the select board have amended Article 14 to include requirements for safe passage of pedestrian and cyclists and more explicit language of what and how the construction liaison would interact with affected neighborhoods. The option of a community liaison for each project has also been added by the amendment. The advisory committee, by a vote of 22-0 with 2 abstentions, voted favorable action on Article 14 as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hyken.
Can you hear me? Just took a
Yes,
moment to
go
unmute.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Steve Hyken speaking for the Planning Board. As you've heard, the Department of Planning and Community Development submitted warrant Article 14 to give explicit authority by adding it to the zoning bylaw for the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals to attach special permit conditions related to mitigating potential adverse impacts of construction to the neighborhood during the construction phase of the project. I want to point out that in some circumstances, the Planning Board and Zoning Board already do attach those sorts of conditions to special permits. They're usually in the form of a requirement that a developer submit a construction management plan to be approved by the building commissioner. And this really makes that more explicit by including the language in the zoning bylaw and also calling attention to the fact that the implementation of this plan is really, the burden is put more on the developer of a project as opposed to those calls going directly to the building department to resolve issues that come up during construction. The planning board met and voted on this before the amendment that was submitted to the select board by De Silva and Thal that added additional language relating to the appointment of a neighborhood liaison as opposed to a developer appointed construction liaison and developer paid for. But I don't believe that that added language materially affects the intent of this. And overall, the planning board voted 5-0 with 1 abstention to recommend approval of warrant Article 14. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone.
Yes, thank you. Scott Gladstone, Precinct 16. My colleague Nathan Spritz and I proposed this idea to the planning department. Kara Bruden did some excellent work, our new director of planning, to change our idea in a little bit in the way that I'll explain in a second if I have the time. This came about because of our experience living in the precinct where Hancock Village is building 2 major impact 40B projects, very large, hundreds and hundreds of units, as well as some smaller infill units. The project is so big and so complicated that Chestnut Hill Realty simply hasn't been able to keep up with all of the necessary requirements of a construction management plan. A construction management plan is fine, but if the town depends on the neighbors to report when there are daily huge semis driving on streets that don't allow trucks, when garbage is overflowing everywhere because of the way they sequence the buildings so that they brought buildings online before building the proper garbage infrastructure, when lawns literally catch fire because of underground electrical conduits that got damaged, when sewage is pouring into people's homes because of damaged sewer pipes, because of a blasting that was supposed to last for only a year, but now was extended to 2 years. It just, the project is so complicated and so big that the town is constantly getting complaints from the neighbors. The town cannot manage all the complaints. Chestnut Hill Realty has actually volunteered to comply with this bylaw, even though it hasn't passed yet. So there is now a construction liaison coming on board. They are going to be the ones to get the complaints so that all of the town departments, health department, building department, planning department, are not overwhelmed by the constant calls from the neighbors. And these people are going to be inspecting the project so that they will proactively be the ones to see when the construction management plan isn't being followed, when bylaws are being violated, when health standards are being violated, et cetera, et cetera. This is a project coming to you soon. Chestnut Hill Realty is doing a major hotel and condominium building right in the heart of Coolidge Corner. They have another one that is on the books to be applied for at the corner of St. Paul and Beacon Street. These kinds of major impact projects need this sort of option that is not in the bylaw yet. And that's why it is essential. So in the last 10 seconds or so, I'm going to say we originally wanted this to be mandatory for major impact projects. Kara would have the good idea that sometimes projects need a little bit more supervision, even if they're not a major impact. If they're smaller, but they include blasting, they include cranes that are going to be swinging over the neighbors. These projects also might need it, but in that case, we really can't make it mandatory. We have to leave it just to the discretion of the ZBA to impose the requirement. And so the bylaw that's in front of you being proposed gives that discretion, but it's a very good idea. It's a very good practice. And believe me, in North Brookline, you'll be glad to have it when you vote in favor of this article. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Thal.
Thank you, Carolyn Thal, Precinct 16, town meeting member. I'll be super brief. Just sort of echoing what other people have said. I figured I would speak because Danielle De Silva and I proposed the amendment that just added a community piece to the language that Kara had crafted, that sort of had the vision of a liaison to manage communication with town departments. Based on our experience that Scott just described well, living in the precinct with Hancock Village, and Ms. De Silva actually is a tenant at Hancock Village, as well as being a town meeting member. We just wanted to make sure there was some language that gave the option to ensure a community liaison as well. To be clear, that's not a community person communicating with town departments, but that this manager liaison would include a community representative to be able to hear directly from neighbors. That's the amendment piece, and urge folks to support this. As Scott said, you'll thank us. I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spritz.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have one slide. So I just wanted to sort of show graphically what the philosophy of this amendment to our zoning bylaw is. It's a little bit hard to sort of understand why anybody would want to do this. There are two kinds of really large projects that we can do in town. One of them are municipal. This is like doing a big school or doing some other building. And another is private. Under both municipal and private development, we spend a lot of time, developers spend a lot of money working through the design aspects, building a construction management plan, building a better exterior so that the neighborhoods are enhanced. And it's a lot of good work that a lot of good people in town do. For municipal projects, however, during the course of construction, there remains constant involvement of town and community members in overseeing the construction project to some degree, so that expectations are well communicated going in both directions. That's a whole, that's the yellow box here. So during the course of construction for private developers, there's this lack of a formalized process, which this bylaw will give the ZBA explicit permission, although it has permission now, but explicit permission to create, so that we can manage expectations and build better communication going backwards and forwards. This helps both the neighborhoods and the contractors because everybody knows what's going to happen. So I just ask everybody to vote in favor of Article 14 and to understand that this will impact everyone at some point, And it gives everybody a chance to participate and to know what's going to go on. Thank you.
Thank you. I've forgotten to make one comment that in response to an issue that was raised earlier in the meeting on the chat monitor. We have a town meeting member who would like all speakers to turn on their video so we can see them. Well, if I'm moderating the meeting, I'm certainly not going to insist on that. It's up to each individual town meeting member whether he or she wishes to have the video feature turned on. So that's the short answer to that inquiry. Mr. Birnbaum? B-I-E-R.
Lee Birnbaum, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. I'd like to recommend favorable action on this warrant article. Brookline desperately needs more housing, which in turn necessitates construction. Decades of underdevelopment, which many of today's residents did not cause, means that today's residents will be subject to potentially frequent disruption as we struggle to catch up to today's housing needs. This article presents a floor of respect, courtesy, and responsibility for developments requesting special permits at the discretion of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Notably, this could include standards for communication on project status and contact information to request information, report complaints, and with an advisory committee amendment, consideration for the safety of people on bicycles, scooters, walking and rolling along construction sites. Such standards have proven themselves necessary by the construction at Hancock Village of these sorely needed additional homes, leading to significant water shutoffs with little to no notice, blasting, and other disturbances. The lengthy sidewalk closure during the building of the 2 Life Assisted Living at 370 Harvard Street, with no proper accommodation for pedestrians or cyclists. Notably, the early forced crosswalk there necessitated that school children cross Harvard Street at an unsignalized crosswalk with no crossing guard to get to and from school, and other projects in recent years. We have a lot of work to do to address our housing needs, and while we cannot let neighbors have a veto over new projects, we owe them the dignity of communication and a baseline level of safety when accessing their homes. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a motion for the question, but I have one more speaker, and if she promises to keep her comments to a minimum, we'll hear from her. Do you promise that, Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, Kim Smith, Precinct 6. I think this is, I wholeheartedly support warrant Article 14. I think there are lots of great aspects in keeping abutters and other residents informed and working out of issues. I was wondering if, had been wondering if this would apply to large municipal projects, but Nathan's presentation indicated that there's a sense that this already exists for public, for the town's own developments. And as recent survivors of the VHS expansion, I think my neighbors would agree that these things weren't consistently experienced throughout the process. Things ran more smoothly in the beginning than further down in the pike. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you. We're ready for a vote on the motion at the bottom of page first, page 1 of supplement number 1 over to page 2. A yes vote would impose this requirement on developers, and a no vote will leave the bylaw as it is. This is on main motion, Article 14. Ready. Voting period is commenced. It requires a 2/3 vote. May I have the vote, please? Motion carries by a 2/3 vote, 232 in favor, 1 opposed, and 3 abstentions. It is 10:28, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn town meeting until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Mr. Burstein moves. Is there a second? From who? Ms. Thal, you have a point of order?
I'm so sorry. I know everybody wants to be done. Thank you, Carolyn Bell, Precinct 16. Mr. Assistant Moderator, I just wanted to be clear, when you introduced the vote, I believe you just said something to the effect of if a yes vote would impose this on developers. I think it was important for Ms. Bruton to be clear. I think she's not here right now, that this is actually to be an option for the ZBA to impose as a condition. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. With that, we've taken the vote, which was pretty decisive. On the motion to adjourn, which has been seconded, ready for a vote? This is not a recorded vote, by the way. That motion to adjourn carries by a vote of 218 in favor, 18 opposed, and 2 abstentions. Town meeting is adjourned until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening.